Chapter 1269. Do you think he'll agree? Roland asked Nightingale after Thunder's footsteps faded away. I don't know, Nightingale replied slowly. But he meant what he said. Roland nodded and did not say anything else. Apart from lightning, Thunder also had his own reasons for staying. As a famous explorer in the fjords, Thunder was the ideal candidate to attract people from the fjords to join him or to serve as the core of the fleet. According to Agatha, the red mist should have covered more than half of the kingdom of Everwinter by now. When the first army arrived, even the border of the kingdom of Wolfheart would not be spared. Under such circumstances, rescuing people along the coastline or attacking from the flanks would be necessary. The evacuation of the northernmost port showed that a powerful fleet could relieve a lot of pressure on the ground forces. Although the merchant ships seemed to be moving in an orderly manner, it was impossible for them to enter the Red Mist area and fight the demons. It was not difficult for Neverwinter to gather a few large ships, but they lacked well-trained sailors and people who could command the fleet. If Thunder was willing to stay, these problems would undoubtedly be solved. However, Roland also knew that he could not force Thunder to agree. He could only wait for Thunder to think it over. When he picked up his pen and was about to continue his work, a telephone suddenly rang. Judging from the line, the caller was from the Witch Building in the Castle District. Hello. Your Majesty, this is Vendi. A familiar voice came from the other end of the line. The Shallow Ports checkpoint reported that they found a witch. Excuse me. Sir, where are you taking us? Thylane asked cautiously while holding Momo's hand. Not long ago, they had followed the long queue to the checkpoint like the other refugees. However, when they entered the registration area, they were asked to leave the queue by a man in black and entered a small, seemingly transparent but tightly guarded room. The two of them immediately tensed up. It wasn't that she hadn't heard that some cities would screen out some people for special interrogation when checking refugees. If they couldn't come up with the corresponding benefits, they would suffer greatly. However, the other party didn't do anything. He just left them in the room for a while and asked them some strange questions before letting them out. Another black-clothed man led them to the inner city. You don't have to be so polite. Just call me Joseph, the man in black said in an easygoing tone. You're witches, right? Thylane was shocked. She didn't expect them to point out her identity so straightforwardly. More surprisingly, how did they know that she had magic power? She thought she had disguised herself well enough. Why do you say that? I don't know anything about magic. The witches told me. Surf scratched the back of his head and said, I heard that they can sense the presence of magic through a special stone. As for where to take you, of course, it's the witch's residence. You must be exhausted from the journey, rest assured, Lady Vendi will take good care of you. Thylane and Momo exchanged a look and saw the surprise in each other's eyes. Firstly, they didn't expect that Neverwinter had a way to identify witches. If the church and the nobles in the kingdom of Wolfheart could do that, they would not have survived until now. Secondly, from the other side's tone, it seemed that witches were cooperating with ordinary people without any barriers. Their master had mentioned the city in the westernmost part of Grey Castle and its ruler, Roland Wimbledon. During the journey before they boarded the ship, they had also heard all kinds of discussions and rumors. However, there was a huge difference between the two rumors. One described the king of Grey Castle as a cruel and arrogant man who recruited witches to satisfy his evil desires, while the other praised the achievements of the new Grey Castle and believed that the witches in the new Grey Castle were living a normal life. It was the second kind of rumor that made them decide to move to the south. However, they were thousands of miles away from each other, so they didn't know what the real situation was. Therefore, they had planned to hide their identities for a while and decide their next step after they found out the truth. They didn't expect that they would be exposed as soon as they arrived in Neverwinter. Fortunately, the people here didn't seem to treat witches as aliens anymore. When they arrived at the periphery of the Grey Castle district, a red-haired woman and two little girls walked over with a smile. Leave the rest to me. Yes, Lady Vendi. Surf saluted and waved at them before he turned around and left quickly. Thylane secretly looked at the woman called Vendi. My name is Vendi, and I'm in charge of the Neverwinter Witch Union. These two are my assistants, Belle and Grey Rabbit, Vendi said with a smile. Can you tell me your names? Although it's Thylane and Momo on the list, I'd like to hear it from you in person. Thylane felt like she was bathing in a spring breeze. It had been a long time since someone had spoken to her in such a gentle tone. However, Vendi looked more like a noble than those so-called nobles. Not only was she mature and attractive, but she also had a different temperament. She looked like a character out of a painting. I'm Thylane, she said in a low voice. Momo, her companion, said her name. They're both good names. Vendi took their hands and said, Welcome to Neverwinter. From now on, this will be your new home. Come on, let me show you where you'll live from now on. After passing through the fence and the courtyard, Thylane found that the Lord's castle was not the tallest building here. Behind it, there was an even larger building. There was a spacious garden and lawn between the two of them, and a few beautiful women were gathered together and chatting. Their faces were brimming with relaxed and carefree expressions. Perhaps, his dream life was also like this, right? Are they, also witches? Momo couldn't help asking. Yes. Vendi nodded. You'll see more of them after work. After work. It means work is over, Belle explained. In Neverwinter, witches, like everyone else, have their own work to do every day. Then the little girl curled her lips and said, there are always diligent and lazy witches. They're just like ordinary people. Didn't your sister tell you that I have sharp ears? A woman with pointy ears looked at them and walked over with a smile. Ah. Sister Lorgar, I'm not talking about you. Belle hurriedly waved her hands and said, I'm talking about, a new member of the League. Another person quickly came over and said, Hello, I'm Mystery Moon, the head of the Neverwinter Detective Group. No matter what abilities you have, you can become a member of the detective group. Are you interested? I'm talking about this one. Belle covered her face helplessly. Oh. Did you happen to introduce me to them? Mystery Moon said with her hands on her hips, remember, the detective group relies on brains, not abilities to solve problems. If someone asks you to join the exploration group, don't say yes. They only care about abilities and ignore the inner qualities, like this Miss Wolf girl. I'll beat you up. Lorgar bared her fangs. See, this is proof. Mystery Moon hurriedly made a defensive posture. How embarrassing. Well, can I go back to reading? The other witches asked in a low voice. Thylane was dumbfounded. Chapter 1270. Wendy patted Thylane's head with a smile. Mystery Moon used to be even more timid than you, even though she's like this now. Ah, stop. Mystery Moon hurriedly begged. That's all in the past. Oh. Really? Lorgar pricked up her ears. At that time, she only dared to come to me secretly when everyone was asleep. If she told me everything, it would take her a whole day. Stop. Mystery Moon shouted. Tell me what you want, Sister Vendi. Don't worry. I won't tell you anything. But Scroll complained to me yesterday that the administrative office is so busy that no one has been cleaning up the archives for a long time. I'm going now. Detective group, please excuse me. She winked at the two witches before she left. See you tonight. Humph. The wolf girl curled her lips and followed the witches out of the courtyard. I'll go and help. I'm a kind-hearted person. After the witches were gone, Grey Rabbit elbowed Belle and muttered in a low voice, I think Sister Lorgar followed them because she didn't want to be labeled as a lazy person. Is that so? Momo burst into laughter. Thylane was also surprised. Although it was only for a moment, she had never seen Roland smile on her way to escape from her master's territory. Everything is good here, except that it's a little noisy sometimes. But you'll get used to it after a while, Vendi said softly. Let's start with the residence. By the time they finished touring the building, Lane was speechless with astonishment. How could there be such comfortable rooms in this world? Although they were not large, they were extremely delicate. Even the most common mattress was unimaginably delicate and soft. She had seen the residence of a noble family before. During the years when she was imprisoned by her master, apart from the shackles and chains, she had spent most of her time in the bedroom. Even so, those fine fabrics, with several layers of pure cotton padding, still couldn't compare. When Vendi insisted that she lie down and try it, she even let out a soft moan. The exhaustion accumulated from wandering around flooded her heart, and she almost didn't want to get up again. Momo's performance wasn't much better. Vendi also carefully explained that the reason why this mattress was so soft was because there were hundreds of springs inside. No matter how one rolled, the mattress and the body would be the best fit. Although Lane did not know what a spring was, she could tell that it was made of pure steel. She did not know whether she should praise the inventor for his ingenuity or waste the material used to make her mattress more comfortable. And that was just one of the many things. For example, a pipe that would automatically release water as soon as the mechanism was turned. For example, there was a mirror hanging in the bathroom that allowed one to clearly see every strand of hair on one's body. For example, stepping on the soft and non-slip floor. For example, a lamp that would glow when filled with magic power. Even the seemingly simple wooden furniture had a unique feel to it. Lane could not tell the specific difference, but she knew that it was very easy to use. Compared with the spacious and magnificent mansions of the nobles, this was more like a real home. The witch building wasn't like this at the beginning, Vendi said. In the past 3 years, many sisters have participated in the renovation of the witch building and popularized the successful project. Not only the castle district, but also the newly built residential areas outside the city have adopted some of the technologies of the witch building. Of course, it's more convenient to live here if you want to enjoy it first. Can we live in this kind of place? Momo asked hesitantly. Of course, as long as you're willing to join the witch union. We can choose not to join. Lane was surprised. Because we've experienced the tragedy of the Witch Cooperation Association. For a moment, Vendi looked a little regretful. Let's not talk about that. Anyway, you can choose where you want to go. Do you remember what the inspector asked you when you passed the port checkpoint? Lane nodded. At that time, only she and Momo were invited into that small room, and they had been on tenterhooks for a long time. That was a threat check, which was only set up for witches. After all, if a person with magic power is malicious, he can cause more damage than an ordinary person. However, once you're not a threat to Neverwinter, you can live freely in the city. In fact, apart from the Witch Union, there's also a witch organization called the Sleeping Spell, which was founded by escaped witches. Its leader is the younger sister of His Majesty Roland Wimbledon. Vendi paused for a moment. Of course, you can choose not to join any organization and live independently. I'll also provide guidance and help as an individual. But our abilities, that's not the point. The point is what kind of life you want to live, Vendi said with a smile and shook her head. If you don't mind, can you tell me about your past? Lane was surrounded by a warm feeling. It was as if the red-haired woman in front of her was born to be trustworthy. Lane did not want to leave, even if it was only for a short while. Perhaps this warmth would disappear after she told her story, but at least for now, she could still stay with her for a little longer. Lane bit her lip and slowly told Roland what she had been through. Before her awakening as a witch, she was no different from most of the people in the village. After her awakening, her experience was similar to that of the other witches. She was expelled, hated, hunted. Desperate, she heard the rumor of the Blood Fang Association. Undoubtedly, she had been longing for a place to live. At the risk of being caught by the church, Lane had finally arrived at Archduke Island and found a guide for the Blood Fang Association. She had never expected that she would face a greater disaster. Not only did the Blood Fang Association not accept her, but they also sold her to a noble in the kingdom of Wolfheart. In the following years, she had been sold many times until she fell into the hands of her former owner. Thylane's ability had also become a way of entertainment. The pills, with magic power, could not only relieve pain but also relieve anxiety, happiness, and other feelings. In terms of treatment, its significance was negligible, because the negative experience would not be eliminated. It would only be delayed until the drug's effect was over. It was fine if the injury was not serious, but if the pain exceeded a certain level, the moment it erupted was no less than receiving an additional fatal injury. Therefore, her former owner had completely regarded her as a tool for pleasure and constantly used the pills to obtain greater pleasure. Not only that, he even shared her with the other nobles, using this kind of trade to strengthen their relationship. It was at that time that Thylane met Momo and several witches who had been sold by the Blood Fang Association. She then realized that the so-called place to live was just a lie made up by the Blood Fang Association and the nobles. Compared to capturing them, it was undoubtedly much easier to wait for the witches to come to them. Later, Thylane was horrified to find that with the invasion of the church, the witches at the private banquets began to disappear one by one. Gradually, only she and Momo were left. It wasn't until one of the nobles let slip that she learned that those people either treated the witches as merits to be handed over, or treated them as trouble and quietly got rid of them. As for the way to solve the problem, just hearing about it made her shudder. Thylane decided to take advantage of the chaos caused by the Church of Hermes to escape with Momo. Chapter 1271. The so-called magic potion did not require pills to take effect. She had never told the nobles that her magic power could be attached to anything. Although it was easy to control the amount of magic power she consumed by taking small pills, the nobles had neglected this important point. In that private banquet, Thylane had used her magic power on all the food and drinks. Only on such an absurd occasion would the nobles lower their guard against her. It turned out that when the pleasure accumulated to a high level, it could be as deadly as pain. When the participants realized that the pleasure was too intense, it was already too late. They clutched their chests and fell to the ground, twitching. Even those who did not eat much felt weak in the limbs and looked dazed as if they were enjoying the ultimate pleasure in the world. The female slaves in the room were so scared that they immediately fled. The guards had no time to stop them. Thylane and Momo took advantage of the chaos and ran out of the manor. After that, they had to hide from place to place. When they heard that Grey Castle was being relocated, they decided to go to the sedimentation bay to try their luck. I see. Vendi took them into her arms. You must have suffered a lot along the way, right? I promise that it won't happen again. Don't you dislike us? Thylane bit her lip. Why should I dislike us? Because of your terrible experiences? Vendi asked softly. If that's the case, I was almost treated like this by the church. There's no reason to blame the victim instead of the perpetrator. But our ability will only bring misfortune to people. Thylane clenched her fists. That's not up to you. But once you experience that kind of pleasure, you'll never forget it. You'll become more and more demanding. In the end, you'll only pursue pleasure and nothing else. If you stay here, I'm afraid, you're afraid that His Majesty can't control himself, or that you're a potential demon. Vendi comforted her. Don't worry. Our Majesty. How should I put it? Although he doesn't look like a king, he's definitely an unusually good person. Thylane was stunned. An unusually good person? It was the first time that she had heard the royal family use this term. It means that you can never guess his thoughts, and you can't use convention to judge his actions. Therefore, any prior worries and fears are meaningless. Trust is the most important thing. Vendi's voice suddenly became unusually soft. The Sisters of the Witch Cooperation Association were also rescued in this way. After a moment of silence, she looked at Momo. By the way, you mentioned your abilities. Could it be that Momo also, this time? The two of them hesitated for a long time. In the end, Momo took the initiative to speak. My former master didn't want me to use my ability anymore, so he dug out my eyes after I awakened. Vendi had already noticed this abnormality. On Momo's face, there was a dirty rag covering half of her forehead. She thought it was to cover a burn or a tattoo, but it turned out to be more serious than that. After saying that, the man slowly took off the rag on his head, revealing the empty eye sockets below. But they didn't know that this could only make me lose half of my vision. Only the god's locket of retribution can block it. Vendi could not help but sigh. A witch who could completely combine magic power with her body was called an extraordinary. Apparently, Momo's situation had nothing to do with being an extraordinary. It was very likely that her ability happened to work on her vision, which caused her eyes to suffer an unexpected disaster. Those nobles didn't take Momo's ability seriously at first. Later, something happened, and then Master attacked her, Thylane said in a low voice. They called Momo the child of hell and used all kinds of punishments on her. She almost died. Vendi stroked Momo's scarred eye sockets lovingly. What did you see? Can you tell me? Momo lowered her head and said. A number. What? A countdown number, indicating the deadline. Vendi finally realized what Momo meant. She could not help but gasp. Is Thylane referring to? Thylane thought to herself. Momo nodded and said, it came true. A noble who only had one life left died the following year. Wendy could not help but fall silent. She finally understood why those nobles had done this to Momo. It was hard for anyone to accept the deadline, especially when there were only a few years left. Even she did not want to get an answer from this ability. But, is it really possible? Vendi asked after thinking for a moment. After all, accidents can happen at any time. Thylane were stunned. What's wrong? Did I say something wrong? No. Thylane quickly waved her hand. I just think, you're different from the others. I didn't expect you to ask about the details of the ability first. Oh. What did you expect me to do? Thylane replied in embarrassment. Push Momo away, ask her whether she used her ability or not, and then drive us out of the castle as far as possible. Vendi could not help laughing. Abilities aren't good or bad. The key lies in the person who uses them. Besides, the more you know about them, the easier it will be for you to use them in the future. Do you think my ability will be useful? Momo asked incredulously. I'm not sure. But His Majesty once told me that every witch's ability has its uses. Just because it doesn't work now doesn't mean it won't work in the future. Thylane stood in a daze for a long while before she slowly replied, this ability can't predict accidents. I've seen some animals being slaughtered with the numbers above their heads for several years. But what? Vendi asked. Some of the numbers have different colors. I don't know what they mean, but I have a feeling that they're different. If you're willing to join the Witch Union, you'll know the reason soon. After all, every new member has to learn how to control their ability and test all aspects of it. Only when you have a deep understanding of your ability can you advance to the next level. Advance? Thylane asked in confusion. You'll find out in the future. Awakening magic power is just the beginning. There's still a lot to learn. Vendi spread out her hands. Have you made up your mind? Thylane and Momo looked at each other. If you can accept this, we're willing to join the Witch Union. Chapter 1272. To welcome our new members, cheers. In the evening, a long table was set up in the open space in front of the witch building, and a lively welcome party was held. Vendi and Scroll took the lead and raised their glasses to the two witches. Cheers, the other witches said in unison. Thylane and Momo held their glasses and did not know what to do. Thylane did not expect that after she had agreed to join the Witch Union, Vendi would take her to a hot bath and put on a new set of clothes, including underwear and socks. Before Thylane could recover from her gratitude and guilt, she was taken to the front of the witch building again, but this time, the lawn had changed. You just have to shout, cheers, and drink all the drink in the glass, Lorgar demonstrated. Like me, gulp, 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 cheers, cheers. Thylane plucked up her courage and imitated Lily. She then closed her eyes and put the glass to her mouth. Tat, 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 the crowd burst into whistles and applause. Lorgar is trying to make people drink again, Lily said, curling her lips. Who said you have to drink all the drink in one gulp? I think she just wants to drink. But that's Evelyn's strawberry liquor, right? It's as good as the Wolf Girls. I underestimated her, Mystery Moon said in amazement. Such a talent must join our detective group. So, in the future, your group will be filled with lazy and drunkards. It's indeed a good match for you. You're also in the group. Mystery Moon raised her index finger. I know. And you still owe me a $10 bill. Forget it. We can start over. Go away. Burp, Thylane gulped down the whole glass of liquor and felt her vision blurring. She had been forced to drink all kinds of liquor before, but none of them was as hot as this one. The liquor did not taste bitter when it entered her throat. Instead, it tasted rich and mellow. It was not until it entered her stomach that she realized it was much richer than ale. However, the biggest difference was not the wine, but her mood at the moment. Seeing the wolf girl pouring another glass of wine and the witch's enthusiastic smiles, for the first time, Thylane felt that drinking was not so painful after all. It made him want to empathize with everyone, and it also loosened the emotions that had been suppressed in his heart for a long time. At this moment, a tall woman walked up to her with a wine glass in her hand. Welcome to Neverwinter. My name is Annie. Just like you, I come from the kingdom of Wolfheart. Even my experience in finding the Blood Fang Association is similar to yours. Thylane was stunned. Did the Blood Fang Association? That's right, but I escaped halfway. In addition, there are many witches who escaped from the kingdom of Wolfheart to Greycastle, such as this one. A seemingly bashful witch was pulled out from behind Roland. Iffy, she used to be a member of the Blood Fang Association. But she didn't know that Heidi Morgan sold witches. Fortunately, it's all over now. It took Thylane a long time to get a general understanding of the establishment of the Blood Fang Association. It turned out that she and Momo were not the only ones who were forced to live in Greycastle because of Heidi Morgan's selfish desires. This nightmarish organization had also vanished into thin air 2 years ago. Hearing this, Thylane could not help but feel relieved. On their way to escape, they had dreamed of being caught by the Blood Fang Association and sent back to the nobles. Now that they knew the organization no longer existed, it was like a heavy knot in their hearts had been untied. I'm sorry. Iffy lowered her head. If I could have stopped Heidi, none of this would have happened. It's not your fault. Momo shook her head. And, even if you could have stopped her, you couldn't have stopped the nobles. It's true. It doesn't matter whether the leader is a witch or not. Without Heidi, someone else would have come to make a new deal with them. Thylane was well aware of those people's desires. Once they had tasted the sweetness, they would not give up easily. See, I told you they wouldn't blame you, Annie said with a smile. Now that you're in Neverwinter, you can come to us if you have any difficulties in the future. Even a silly girl like Iffy can live here. I'm sure you'll have no problem. Cheers, Annie said and raised her glass. Cheers, Thylane said more fluently this time. It's my turn again. Lorgar shouted with a blush. Me too. Lightning joined in. I'm an adult now. I can drink. Coo, coo, coo. You can't. Pigeons can't drink. Coo. Hey, don't just drink. Eat something. Nana, you're not an adult yet. Don't play with them. The atmosphere on the lawn became more and more lively. It's been a long time since we had new members. Now that we have 2 new members, everyone seems very happy, Scroll, who was sitting beside the long table, said with a sigh. It's the right thing to do to show them around the witch building first. I'm beginning to understand His Majesty's tricks. Vendi smiled. Even if they get in touch with the sleeping spell first, I'm confident that I can win them over. According to His Majesty, this is called sugarcoating, something. You're getting better and better, Scroll joked. You thought you weren't capable enough at first, but now you're planning to make Princess Tilly his girlfriend. I'm just making an analogy. You've been learning everything since you were in the Witch Cooperation Association. Vendi poured Scroll a glass of chaos drink. But I can't get tired of watching such a lively scene. It's a pity that we can only watch from the sidelines. Scroll shrugged. What's wrong with that? If possible, I'd like to stay by their side and watch, Vendi said softly. Scroll did not respond. The two of them fell silent. They watched the lively crowd from afar while enjoying the delicious food at the banquet. For them, this was not silence, but a kind of tacit understanding formed after a long time together. Until a familiar voice interrupted, after the banquet, His Majesty wants to see the witch named Momo. Nightingale's figure gradually emerged from the mist. Vendi quickly realized what Roland was thinking. Her relaxed expression slightly froze. Take her there, Scroll said. From the moment you told him your ability, this was bound to happen. After all, His Majesty is more curious than anyone else. Vendi was silent for a moment. I see. If you don't want to know the answer, you can leave first. I think His Majesty will understand. Scroll paused. But no matter what the answer is, we'll do the same, won't we? Chapter 1273. When the lights in the backyard dimmed, Roland saw the witch in the report in the office. She looked young, at most 16 or 17 years old. Her hands and feet were slender, and her body was thin. It was obvious that she was malnourished. Although she had washed her hair, her short, light brown hair was still as yellow as straw. The most eye-catching thing about her was the black blindfold on her face. Although it had been replaced with a new one, it still stood out in comparison to her young features. Your Majesty, she's Momo, Vendi said. Roland's voice seemed to wake her up. The girl hurriedly knelt down and tried to lower her head as much as possible. Your Majesty, pull her up. Roland put down the drawing in his hand and replied in a gentle tone. Don't be nervous. This isn't a formal occasion, so you don't have to be so cautious. The reason why I asked you to come here is very simple. I want you to perform your ability on me. Momo, who had just regained her balance, suddenly looked flustered. Your Majesty, I'm afraid, I know that not everyone is satisfied with their time limit, and some people will even vent their anger on others after getting an answer that they don't like. Roland comforted her. But I just want to know the result. No matter what it is, I won't blame you. I can promise you that. Normally, this kind of thing should be done after Vendi finished her ability test. However, her ability was so special that he could not suppress his curiosity. In fact, he had always had a guess about Zero's soul battlefield, but he had never been able to verify it. Now, he finally had a chance to verify it. Your Majesty, Momo said through gritted teeth. Aren't you afraid at all? Roland knew that if it were in the past, he would never take the initiative to ask such a question. As the saying goes, a mediocre person worries too much. Knowing how long he could live would undoubtedly add to his troubles. However, the longer he stayed on the throne, the more he felt that he had a great responsibility. Obviously, the mentality of an ordinary person was no longer suitable for the current situation. If the other party's description wasn't wrong, predicting the age itself was an extremely valuable piece of information. In another world, it could be called, revealing the secrets of heaven. It would be a pity to treat it as a heavy burden. However, even if he said these thoughts, the other party would not understand, so Roland just smiled. No matter how afraid I am, it's not as if it doesn't exist. Momo clenched her fists. After a while, she nodded and said, since you asked for it. Forgive me for being rude. Your Majesty. Vendi took a deep breath. Please allow me to take my leave. Roland gazed at her for a moment. I thought you and Scroll were the ones who wanted to know the most. I can't be as calm as you, but as Scroll said, no matter what the result is, we will support you to the end. After the door was closed, Roland turned his head. What about you? Momo was stunned. Isn't that obvious? Then Nightingale appeared behind her, which startled the girl. I want to know everything about you, no matter if it's good or bad. Two people with completely different personalities. Roland laughed inwardly. Then let's begin. Momo looked back and forth between Nightingale and him several times in surprise. Finally, she took off her blindfold as if she had made up her mind. When she raised her head again, a red light appeared in her empty eye sockets. The eyeball, which seemed to be made of magic, reflected on the deep scar and looked particularly strange. Roland could imagine what it would look like when it overlapped with the eye. In the future, this kind of strange pupil would definitely be sought after by a large number of people, but in this era, it was not unusual for it to be regarded as a demon's eye. How is it? Did you see anything? Momo looked at Roland and then suddenly opened her eyes wide. The red light kept jumping as if it was stirred by an invisible wind. In just a few seconds, the light quietly went out. She took 2 steps back and sat on the ground powerlessly. Roland noticed that Momo's face was covered in sweat. What's wrong? He stood up. Nightingale dashed to Momo's side and reached out her hand to support her. This is the side effect of overconsumption of magic power. Can this ability only see one person at a time? No. I've never seen such a scene before, Momo gasped. It's like there are many strings of numbers flashing, appearing and disappearing constantly, and the colors are completely different. Until the end, the group of numbers is fixed. What is it? Roland asked. Momo swallowed and replied with difficulty, 17, red. How can it be? Nightingale was greatly surprised. Roland's heart skipped a beat. Sure enough, his guess was right. The winner of the Soul Battlefield could indeed obtain everything, but the premise was that the winner must have magic power. Whether it was lifespan or ability, they all had to be realized through magic power. Magic power endowed the extraordinaries with a strong physique, and also enabled the large hybrid demonic beasts to have the power to support their bodies. Without magic power, nothing could be achieved. But then again, 17 years was shorter than he had imagined. Although he had long known that Prince Roland's physique was not very good, he did not expect it to be so bad. Could it be that he had spent too much time on sensual pleasures in his early years that his body was exhausted? How about? I have another look. Momo struggled to stand up. No need. That's all for today. Roland waved his hand. Overconsumption of magic power will make you faint. Moreover, it's meaningless to look at it before you figure out the details of the ability. But Your Majesty, as I said, I just want to know the result. You don't have to worry about it, Roland stopped her. Go back and have a good rest. From tomorrow onwards, Vendi will take you to have an ability test and learn how to control magic power. If you want to look at it again, it's not too late to do so then. Also, help me to keep this a secret, okay? Momo looked at him in surprise for a moment and nodded vigorously as if she had just woken up. After sending the girl to Vendi, Nightingale returned to the office and walked step by step to Roland, who was standing in front of the French window. Do you regret it? Roland tilted his head. Are you kidding me? Nightingale said grumpily. I never regret my decisions. But what about you? What are you going to do in the next 17 years? It's better to know sooner than later. Besides, it's still uncertain whether this will be the final result. Looking at the scattered lights outside the window, Roland found that he was calmer than he had expected. Let's not talk about the fact that tequila's soul container can retain its consciousness. After we figure out the magic power in the future, it may not be difficult to create a new body. The premise is that the future really exists, Nightingale said with a frown. That's right. So the first thing we need to do is to win the Battle of Divine Will during this period, Roland said word by word. Chapter 1274. In the Tusk City, the capital of the Kingdom of Wolfheart. The city, which had been looted by the church, had yet to recover. Standing on the highest point of the castle, one could see that many streets and alleys in the outskirts of the city had become ruins. Compared to the Tusk Castle, which had been ravaged by the demonic disease, Tusk City was much luckier. At least, it was not like the Tusk Castle, where piles of rotten corpses could still be seen in the wells and drains. Several months ago, this area was still the territory of the Tusk family, a branch of the royal family. Iron Axe did not pay attention to the struggle between the Tusk, Token, and Redstone gates, but the sudden appearance of the red mist forced him to make some adjustments. After all, no matter how poor the Tusk City was, it was still one of the most important cities in the Kingdom of Wolfheart, and it was connected to the main road from the north to the south. Only by conquering this city could the troops of the Kingdom of Everwinter reach safety. There was nothing worth mentioning in the course of the battle. Even without the support of the Longsong cannons, Iron Axe had mobilized 5 temporary squads of 500 soldiers to break into the Tusk Castle, which was known as a natural stronghold, and the Tusk City, which had strong walls, with mortars and anti-demon grenades. The Castellan, Hybok, was shot down by a precise shooter when he went forward to supervise the battle. The remaining nobles surrendered one after another, and one of the 3 major forces in the Kingdom of Wolfheart was destroyed. As the top military officer who had followed Roland since the first battle in Border Town, Iron Axe was the one who knew how fast Neverwinter was improving. 5 years ago, the First Army was still fighting with the Duke of Longsong, but now, as long as His Majesty wanted, the First Army could easily destroy any kingdom. It could be said that their growth had far surpassed the others, and they were no longer on the same level as the nobles. However, this did not make Iron Axe feel relaxed or complacent. The greater the gap between humans and demons, the more he knew how great the gap between humans and demons was. Facing the demons supported by the Red Mist, the First Army could barely stand firm in the Kingdom of Everwinter. Every day, troops would retreat back to the Kingdom of Wolfheart, and the casualty reports never stopped. In the absence of a permanent line of defense, the enemy's ability to advance and pursue made it difficult for the teams to guard against them. Furthermore, there were reports that the enemy had suddenly appeared on the path that the retreating team members had to pass through several times. That path had clearly been checked repeatedly and confirmed to be safe. This kind of passive situation would undoubtedly have a negative impact on the morale of the troops. The simplest way to deal with it was to immediately transfer all the troops back to the Cage Mountain to rest and reorganize. However, Iron Axe knew that orders and tasks were more important than anything else. Since His Majesty needed more people, he could not withdraw all the troops for fear of casualties. In that case, the only way left was to counterattack. He clenched his fist with all his might and punched the demon's face. Only in this way could they slow down their unbridled pursuit and allow the evacuating troops to vent their anger. He chose the Tusk City as his target. "The demon's defense seems to be weakening," Brian said while holding the telescope. Since His Majesty began to mobilize troops, he had followed the First Fleet from the southernmost region to the Sedimentation Bay. Together with him were 1,500 Majin clan warriors. This was the first time in Greycastle's history that the Sand Nation had been conscripted. It started from the border of the Everwinter Kingdom. Iron Axe nodded. Edith was right. It's a double-edged sword for the demons to build the obelisk on the ridge of the continent. It's a hidden place, but it also prevents them from moving south. Looking north from the top of the castle tower, one could see the blood-like gloomy clouds between the sky and the earth. That was the ever-expanding red mist, which had now crossed the boundary between the Everwinter Kingdom and the Kingdom of Wolfheart and was slowly approaching the Tusk City. The city below the gloomy clouds was Goldwater Town in the Kingdom of Wolfheart. Half of the town had been enveloped by the red mist, but there was still no sign of the fortress-like monstrous beasts. There were also very few devil beasts hovering in the sky, as if they had been forgotten by the demons. If this had happened before the appearance of the red mist, it would have been almost impossible for this to happen. After this period of fighting, the general staff had a general understanding of the demon's strategy. In a sense, they coincided with His Majesty's strategic intention, which was to control more human cities and make humans work for them. That was why the First Army, which had evacuated the civilians, was a priority target. In order to occupy human territory as quickly as possible, they would often take the initiative to attack. They would use the fortress-like monstrous beasts to create a small red mist area so that their troops could move quickly from one place to another like frogs and attack the cities before the red mist arrived. However, when most of the kingdom of Everwinter fell into the hands of the demons, their speed of advance slowed down significantly. This meant that with the expansion of their territory, the demons were already having a hard time. Looking at the situation, it was easy to understand. It took time to coerce humans and build camps. When they were short of manpower, the more land they occupied, the less troops they could mobilize. Another key point was that the demons did not need to gather their main force to fight against the humans. With sufficient logistics, they could pose a fatal threat to the first army by relying on a small force. Therefore, starting from the border of Everwinter, the frequency of the enemy's attacks had decreased significantly. Perhaps they did not reduce the total number of people invested in the attack, but at this moment, the contact area between the red mist and the mainland had been stretched from the initial point to the current line that was hundreds of kilometers long. It was impossible to cover everything without greatly increasing the number of troops. Iron Axe was keenly aware of this. "Sir, the goods from Neverwinter have all been sent to the Tusk City," a soldier ran up the tower and reported. "Finally!" Iron Axe exclaimed. He turned to Brian and said, "Let's go and have a look." When they came out of the city, they saw hundreds of iron buckets in the open space in front of the city gate. They were about half a man's height and a cubit wide. They were perfectly round and did not have a single opening. "Sir, what are these?" Brian walked around one of the buckets, feeling puzzled. If they were containers, they should have a handle to open them. But if they were weapons? Actual combat had proven that fixed explosives were far less effective than cannons. It was too impractical to rely on them to defeat the demons. He pushed the bucket with his hand and found that it did not move at all. Apparently, it was filled with something and was extremely heavy. It was not an easy task to transport these hundreds of metal buckets to the front lines. For them to be worth expending such precious transportation resources, they were definitely not unimportant items. Chapter 1275. In an abandoned house in Broken Tooth Castle, Jotl was observing the situation in the Tusk City through a peephole. Due to the height difference, he could only see a small area near the city gate. That was the checkpoint they had to take down as soon as the battle began. In this operation, the Majins would be the vanguard of the charge. It was not that Lord Brian intended to use them as expendable resources, but that they had fought for this opportunity. Proving oneself by force and exchanging merits for resources was the general rule in the southernmost region. Jotl came from a small, unremarkable clan in the oasis. When the Silver Stream oasis slowly disappeared, his clan was already on the brink of death. If not for that, he wouldn't have taken such a huge risk to deal with the Northerners. But now, everyone in the clan had safely migrated to the port of Clearwater, the evergreen land that they had always dreamed of. This was the reward he had gotten for the battle between the Great Chief and the Wildwave and Cutbone clans. Therefore, Jotl volunteered to fight for a simple reason. He wanted to kill more enemies so that his tribe could live a better life. As for who the enemies were, it did not matter. Even the demons from hell could not be scarier than hunger, thirst, and fear that they might not see tomorrow. He believed that most of the Sand Nation people who came here had the same idea. "Did you find anything?" someone behind him asked. "No, except that the red mist is getting thicker and thicker, I can't see anything else." Jotl quietly blocked the hole and turned around. The one who asked the question was Fairy, the smallest in the team. The gun on his back was almost longer than his torso. A deep scar stretched from his forehead to the corner of his mouth, which did not match his youthful features. Jotl had a deep impression of this person. Even though he looked young, the qualities he displayed in training and actual combat were different from normal people. Even those famous warriors with rich experience might not be able to win against him. Logically speaking, such a man should not be unknown in the small oasis, but the fact was that Jotl had never heard of such a man before. "We've been waiting for almost 2 weeks, haven't we?" Fairy complained. It's driving us crazy to have hundreds of people in one place. Didn't Lord Brian say that the demons have giant flying beasts? If we don't want to attract the enemy's attention, we have to set up an ambush. Jodl was a little surprised. Haven't you participated in the hunting ceremony? In order to hunt a sandworm, it's normal to hide in the bushes for half a month. What's wrong with waiting a little longer? According to the plan, Iron Axe had mobilized a total of about 2,000 people to hide in the northern district of Broken Tooth Castle, and arranged a reserve force of 1,000 people further south in the inner city. The hiding place had already been tidied up. On the surface, it looked no different from ruins, but inside, a simple shelter had been built. The upper floor was used for scouting, while the lower floor was used for living. Not only was water and food prepared, even sleeping and excrement areas were separated. Although it couldn't completely isolate the smell, compared to the hunting ceremony, this was already a relatively relaxed environment. He did not understand why the other party would suddenly complain about this. You don't understand. Fairy wanted to say something but stopped. In the end, he glared at him and sat down against the wall. What do you think the metal cans they prepared before were used for? They dug holes and buried wires. In the end, when the enemy came, there was no movement at all. I don't know, but if it's something the chief made, I don't think it's strange that anything happened. He had seen too many incredible items, tools, and weapons in the past year or so. I hope it won't be the next pill of madness, Fairy muttered. Pill of madness? He seemed to have heard of it somewhere. Jodl was about to ask him when suddenly someone poked his head out from under the floor. There's news from the rear. The attack is about to begin. Get ready quickly. Phew, Fairy let out a long breath. Finally, we don't have to wait anymore. I'll go down now. Jodl was more thoughtful. What's the order to attack? Is it still the same as planned? That's right, the man replied. When the explosion sounds, it's the time for the whole army to move out. It's time. Iron Axe put down the telescope, turned around and ordered, turn on the power now. Yes, sir. 2 soldiers of the demolition team started to turn the hand-operated generator, while the third one put his hand on the lever. It was finally time to verify the results of their long preparation and plan. The red mist had now covered the whole of the kingdom of Wolfheart. If the first army continued to retreat, the Broken Tooth Castle would soon fall into the demons' hands. The 2 cities were like Silver City and Grey Castle, which were very close to each other. In the past, the Broken Tooth Castle had become an excellent barrier for the Tusk City because of its natural terrain. There was a saying in the kingdom of Wolfheart that the Tusk City would be safe as long as the Tusk City remained intact. But now, they were going to use the Broken Tooth Castle as a stepping stone to give the enemies who occupied the Tusk City a head-on blow. Iron Axe had long noticed that the demons did not always wear the breathing device. Perhaps, for them, the equipment was an extra burden. Except for the mad demons who chased after the refugees, the rest of the demons would only move around in the red mist. This was obviously an opportunity for the first army. Sir, the demolition team is ready. Iron Axe ordered in a low voice, detonate. As the soldier pressed the lever, a dazzling red light suddenly rose to the north of the Broken Tooth Castle. More than 500 iron barrels were detonated at the same time. Countless golden flames rose to the sky and engulfed the entire King's City. Everyone heard a series of continuous rumbling sounds. However, this was just the beginning. The barrels were filled with the rubber worm gels made by Kyle, but they were also filled with highly flammable oil, aluminum, magnesium powder, and other combustion-supporting agents. They looked soft and harmless when they were solidified, but when the blast wave of the explosives tore them into mist and sent them into the sky, the dispersed gels became extremely deadly. The burning spread so fast that it was no different from an explosion. The air was heated to nearly 1,000 degrees in a very short time, and the expanding airflow further fueled the fire. A chain reaction took place at this moment. Probably because the temperature had exceeded a certain threshold, the rain of fire that was supposed to fall suddenly tore the sky apart and formed a huge net over the city like an orange-red lightning. The flames did not spread from the top to the bottom, but from the ground to the sky. Iron Axe was also shocked by this scene. After a while, he realized that the red mist had been ignited by the rain of fire. This scene seemed to be very clear, but in fact, it happened in a split second. The rapidly splitting red lightning filled the entire sky in an instant, turning the net into an impenetrable cover. Then there was an even bigger explosion. The fiery cover was broken, and a huge fireball rose from it like a firebird breaking out of its shell, soaring into the sky. This roar was much louder than the sound of the iron barrels being detonated. Iron Axe even saw the air around King's City being distorted. Chapter 1276. When they heard the first explosion, Jodl's team followed Brian's order and rushed out of their hiding places one by one. But before they could take a few steps, another earth-shattering noise came from the north. The noise was so loud that it even stirred up the dust on the ruins. The ground shook so violently that they almost fell to the ground. Jodl steadied himself and looked in the direction of the Tusk City in surprise. Because he was at a low position, he could only see an orange fireball rising with billowing smoke, like a fist waving towards the sky. Around the fireball, the red mist was brightly illuminated, as if the sky was burning. The Sand Nation's eyes were filled with fear. This scene could only be described as the wrath of the three gods. Don't be afraid. Jodl clenched his teeth, raised his arms and shouted, "That's the chief's way to deal with the enemy. It's the demons who should be afraid." His words made everyone come back to their senses. Yes, it's the chief's heavenly fire. Don't stop. Keep going. The stagnant team started running again. People kept coming out from the cracks in the walls, the windows, the corners of the collapsed houses, and joined the attacking team. Soon, this inconspicuous group of people became an unstoppable tide, rushing toward the Tusk City. Jodl was the first to run. Although he had been convinced by the chief for a long time, he always thought that the Sand Nation was better at fighting than the Northerners, especially a warrior from a small clan like him who was born in a barren oasis and had been fighting with death since he was a child. It wasn't just bows and arrows, even if it was a gun, it would be the same. After receiving Brian's training, he had even developed a unique skill. Not only was he good at target shooting, but he could also hit the target while running. Now was undoubtedly the time to prove himself. Not only did he want to be the first to rush into the city, but he also wanted to be the first to win the battle. He wanted Jodl's name to be known by the whole army. However, when the troops climbed up the slope and saw the city wall of the Tusk City, a terrible heat wave swept over them. For a moment, Jodl almost thought that he was back in the southernmost region, and that he was still on the top of a sand dune in the middle of summer. The hot air scorched his skin, making it hard for him to even open his eyes. The people behind them weren't any better. It was as if the whole team had crashed into an invisible wall. Their speed slowed down, and some of the Northerners who had rushed to the front even ran back pathetically. They crouched down at the bottom of the slope, as if they could avoid the sudden heat by doing so. Jodl forced himself to walk a few dozen steps, feeling that something was wrong. The fireball that rose into the air had already been extinguished, leaving only a ring of smoke that was still spreading. A piece of the red mist that had originally covered the sky was missing, as if it had been bitten off by a giant beast. The surrounding mist did not immediately fill in, instead forming a large arc of emptiness. Through the open city gate, he saw that the ground inside the city seemed to be churning with heat waves. The contours of the buildings had become extremely distorted, especially the wooden houses that had been destroyed by the explosion. The scattered scorched black pillars were like the claws of a demon that had reached out from the ground. The enemies did not rush over to stop them, nor did they flee in panic. In fact, he could not find any trace of the demons. At the same time, Jodl felt that he could not breathe. The surging heat around him made him dare not open his mouth to breathe. His body also seemed to resist moving forward. Every step was as heavy as a mountain. Damn it, when did I become so weak? The city wall was not far away, but he felt that he had lost all his strength and his vision was blurring. Jodl staggered and fell to the ground. The last thing he saw was Fairy's disgusted face as he dragged him away. The outcome of this battle was completely beyond the expectations of Iron Axe and the general staff. According to the original plan, most of the outer city would be turned into a sea of fire by the rows of burning barrels that surrounded the northern part of the royal city. The raging flames would not only engulf the flammable houses, but also incinerate the red mist inside and outside the city. This would make the Tusk City an isolated island, for the time being, and the demons who did not carry breathing devices would inevitably fall into chaos and panic. The final decision was made by the ambushed troops. Although Roland did not know the exact number of the demons, according to his previous intelligence, the demons would deploy their troops according to the number of people they occupied. The fact that the Tusk City had been evacuated would definitely be noticed by the scouts of the enemies. Therefore, during the first few days when the red mist covered the city, there would not be more than 500 enemies entering the city. In other words, the First Army would have an absolute advantage in both numbers and momentum. As for how many enemies they could kill in the end, that was not the focus of this battle. After all, in order to avoid the detection of the devil beasts, the soldiers had to hide in secret passages and ruins, and all the heavy weapons were useless. It was not difficult to suppress the enemies with rifles and anti-demon grenades, but it was difficult to chase after the enemies. The main purpose of this battle was to reduce the demons' momentum. As long as the demons realized that the retreating human beings still had the ability to fight back, they would be able to relieve the pressure on the evacuating troops. However, the battle came to an abrupt end at the stage of the explosion. The expected wall of fire did not appear. Instead, it turned into an earth-shattering explosion. King's City, where the flames swept across, became a forbidden area. The ambushed troops did not even have the chance to cross the city gate before they were forced back by the heat wave. Some of them even suffered burns and fainted. At this point, it was obvious that the follow-up attack could not be carried out. Of course, this did not mean that the battle was a failure. Iron Axe could even feel the scorching air outside the city wall, so he could easily imagine the situation inside the city. It had never been proven that the demons could withstand the heat better than humans. The only thing that Iron Axe regretted was that he could not go to the battlefield himself to see the specific results of this battle. He did not know when the temperature inside the city would drop, and this was obviously not a good place to stay. "Sir, all the troops have retreated from the Tusk Castle. We're the only ones left." Brian walked into the temporary command center, his eyes full of excitement. For him, who had witnessed this scene in a real battle without experiencing the test of the new weapon, this battle was indeed a scene that he would remember for the rest of his life. "Good. Let's retreat." Iron Axe nodded. "I guess it won't be long before the enemies notice us. When the pursuing troops arrive, it won't be easy for us to leave." Chapter 1277. 20 hours ago, Haxord received a report that there was a huge fireball in the direction of the kingdom of Wolfheart. At that time, Haxord was still in a city in the west of the kingdom of Everwinter, accepting the allegiance of a human lord. To be honest, Haxord did not want to pay attention to such a small thing. If it were not for the fact that the reporter repeatedly mentioned the strange explosion and the unusual destructive power, Haxord would not have come in person. Haxord was annoyed enough to deal with human beings, but he was the only one in the entire Western Front who could do this. Not every subordinate was as smart as Ursruk, who would always learn something useful. Most ascendants regarded human beings as bugs, let alone learning their language. Haxord's generals were no exception. They were all loyal and capable, but they were only limited to fighting. If Haxord asked them to negotiate with human beings, they would tear the human beings into pieces in less than half a day. However, human beings were very easy to tame. Although they were physically weak, they were very smart. In the early stage of development, they could replace many inferior demons. Therefore, it was not in the interest of Haxord to kill them all. In the end, it was all Valkyrie's fault. Valkyries was the senior lord who was good at this, but now she was still immersed in the red mist pool. Haxord always felt that his patience was running out. However, when Haxord flew over the Tusk City, he immediately realized that something was wrong. There were very few floating monsters in the city, as if something had cleaned up the city. The inside of the city was a mess. Houses that had been washed away and charred wooden frames could be seen everywhere. When the team landed, Haxord found that the ground was warm and a pungent smell came to his face. Haxord soon found the source of the smell. A group of strange-looking inferior demons curled up on the street. Their skin had turned black and fallen off. Obviously, they had been burned to death by the fire. What was strange was that there was no obvious fire starter around the inferior demons. There were only bricks and mud around them. It was hard to imagine how the fire could reach them. There was more than one such scene. Totolok, you and your subordinates will each take 10 people to search for the human army. If you find anything, report to me immediately. Yes, Master. Siasis, find out what's going on. Also, find out if there are any survivors. Yes, my lord. The ascended person quickly accepted the order and left. Haxord, on the other hand, walked along the long street and slowly made his way to the northern part of the city, where the damage was the most severe. According to the report, it was a supply team of inferior demons that were attacked. These pitiful creatures that could never advance were at the bottom of the race, equivalent to human laborers or slaves. At that time, they were transporting a batch of obsidian and secondary red mist pawns into the Tusk City so that they could build a camp for junior demons or level UPS. This could also be seen from the wreckage at the scene. The cut and dyed obsidian was scattered everywhere, and some of the inferior demons were still in the same state when they were moved. There was no sign of fighting, which meant that the humans did not have direct contact with the supply team. The battle broke out abruptly and ended abruptly. Therefore, it was reasonable to infer that the other party had set up a trap here instead of gathering an army under the nose of the Bogle beasts. Totolok's search this time was likely to be fruitless. But the more it was so, the more apprehensive Sky Lord felt. He would rather the enemies come in groups, which would make it easier for them to be discovered. Haxord did not care about the lives of the inferior demons, but he could not afford to lose the battle on the Western Front. If the main force ran into such a trap, the consequences would be unimaginable. There was no doubt that the enemies had used fire to attack. Haxord was no stranger to fire. In the past battles of Divine Will, they had also used fire to conquer human cities. However, because the red mist did not like high temperatures, it was rare to see it. However, it was the first time for Sky Lord to see a fire that could burn an inferior demon to death. Unless the whole city was turned into a huge furnace. But how was that possible? If the humans had such a means, Sky Lord had to know that the Western Front was in danger. Wait. Fire? An image suddenly flashed across Haxord's mind. It was the image he saw when he searched Kabradabi's memory in the realm of mind. A bright fireball suddenly burst out like the rising sun. Was it this kind of fire weapon that Kabradabi saw? Sky Lord could not help but feel a chill run down his spine. Just as Sky Lord was feeling bewildered, Siasis's voice suddenly interrupted his thoughts. My lord, the basic situation has been investigated. This supply team has a total of 350 inferior demons. At the same time, there are more than 10 primal demons as guards. We haven't found any survivors yet, but I think I've figured out what those bugs are capable of. Oh. Tell me about it. Please follow me. Haxord followed Siasis to the north of the city wall. Some primal life forms were busy digging something. Around them was a pile of black metal fragments. Further away, a few siege vehicles were lying on the side of the road. Ever since the symbiotic demons were successfully cultivated, these old war machines became specialized transportation tools. Look. Siasis stretched out his tentacles and picked up a fragment on the ground. There were obvious traces of melting. If you put them together, they should be a container. There are hundreds of them lined up along the edge of the city. I think the bugs probably stuffed them with snow powder and combustibles. They plan to cut off the supply team's escape route and then launch an attack during the chaos. After fighting with humans for so long, Haxord was no stranger to the weapons they used. In the process of hunting down the enemies, he had obtained a lot of them. Whether it was the fire branch or the fire crossbow, they both used explosive materials such as snow powder as a primer. Compared to magic-powered weapons, it was obviously much more complicated. Because of this, the structure of these weapons was very exquisite. This was a skill that had not been seen 400 years ago. If it was just an ordinary flame, how could it cause such great damage? My lord, I'm afraid these flames are not ordinary. At least their temperature is much higher than ordinary flowing fire. But even so, they can't kill all the inferior demons. I think the key lies in those siege vehicles. What do you mean? Haxord asked. Siaces was a psionic warlock. Ascendants who evolved from this branch had sharp observation skills. This was why the Sky Lord had sent him to investigate the battlefield. When the snow powder exploded, it probably affected the siege vehicles that were passing through the city gate. The latter are usually used to transport heavy objects, such as red mist ponds or storage tanks. The high temperature caused them to explode and further aggravated the disintegration of the red mist. Siaces' rapidly swaying tentacles made hissing sounds. You know, when the temperature reaches a certain level, anything can be ignited, including us. Siaces' explanation made Haxord feel slightly relieved. Regardless of whether this explosion was a coincidence, at least the huge fragments of the metal bucket made him feel more at ease. Needing to bury a large number of traps beforehand and being able to launch them at any time were two completely different concepts. As long as they took strict precautions, these traps would not pose a threat to the large army in the wild. Of course, it also knew that it was not easy to quickly inspect a human city. Forbidding the red mist ponds and storage tanks from being transported and stacked together could not completely eliminate this threat. It did not think that the simple-minded primal demons and inferior demons could solve this problem. The most effective way was to use the humans themselves. My lord, what should we do next? Slow down the speed of entering the city and let the humans inspect for us. Haxord quickly made a decision. We can't transfer more inferior demons from other places for the time being. Let Snow Reflection Castle make up for the losses. I think Earl Marwain will be happy to work for me. Chapter 1278. Ever since the red mist poured down from the peak of the impassable mountain, everything in the world seemed to be covered by a thin veil. Marwain Parker thought that he would feel as uncomfortable as being in a dusty mine, but to his surprise, he did not feel any discomfort. If he breathed hard, he could even feel a trace of dampness and coolness. According to the demon commander, the mist contained the essence of life. Not only would it not cause any harm to humans, but it would also nourish them. Only witches who specialized in going against it would suffer a fatal backlash. Let's not talk about the credibility of this statement for now, but from the looks of it, other than slightly affecting the line of sight, there were no other disadvantages. After a month, he had basically gotten used to life in the red mist. Your Grace, His Excellency the Sky Lord has sent someone. Just then, a guard walked into the study. He's waiting for you in the courtyard. Marwain nodded without batting an eyelid. Ask him to stay where he is. I'll go over right away. Yes. After the guard closed the door, Marwain could not help but smile. That's right, Duke. No matter how many times he heard it, he was elated. A month ago, when the demons passed through the ice abyss and attacked Snow Reflection Castle, he thought it was the rumored end of the world. He did not expect the demons to let him go. After discarding his inherent prejudice, Marwain realized that the demon who called himself the Sky Lord was not as difficult to communicate with as he had imagined. To a certain extent, he was even easier to deal with than the people of Grey Castle. At least the former would not turn a noble's territory into nothingness without a word. The demons did not collect taxes, seize land, or seize power. As long as they swore loyalty, they would be able to keep everything they had and even have the chance to obtain more. Apart from the fact that their methods were a little rough, there were no other disadvantages. Especially after the Sky Lord handed him the management of the 3 cities around Snow Reflection Castle, he felt that this might not be a bad idea. Snow Reflection Castle was like an isolated island, easy to defend and difficult to attack. It was difficult for others to threaten his territory, and it was difficult for him to expand it. He had thought that he would have to wear the title of Earl for the rest of his life, but he did not expect that he would take a big step forward when the end of the world came. With the entire northern region of the Kingdom of Everwinter, he was fully deserving of the title of Duke of the Northern Region. Marwain pressed his hand to the corner of his mouth, and with great difficulty, he suppressed his smile. He closed the window and turned to go downstairs. Yes, when the demons invaded the city, they did kill dozens of guards and hundreds of citizens, but how could there be no deaths in war? Wasn't the demarcation line between the nobles also decided through war? Now that he controlled 4 cities, not only did the imperial guards not shrink, but they doubled in number. Needless to say, as long as there was land and food for them to live, they would be able to make up for it in a few years. As for those who said behind his back that he chose to submit to the devil out of fear, they should all be sent to the gallows. Upon entering the courtyard, Marwain immediately saw the messenger sent by the Sky Lord, as well as the gigantic monster lying beside him. To be honest, he could not tell the difference between these guys from their appearance. Unlike Haxord, they were ugly and crude, and did not know any manners or manners. If it wasn't for the sake of the commander of the Devil Army, he didn't want to deal with these beasts at all. What instructions does Your Excellency Sky Lord have for me? The other party took out a stone from his mount's bag and handed it to him. Then, he opened his bloody mouth and said in a clumsy tone, "You. Listen." Magic voice transmission again. Feeling the fishy smell from the messenger's mouth, Marwain could not help but lean back slightly, trying hard to suppress the disgust in his heart. "I'm listening." The stone flickered twice, and soon, a familiar voice sounded out of nowhere. "How does it feel to be the lord of a territory? I hope you haven't forgotten your promise, Mr. Lord." "Of course not, Your Excellency," Marwain hurriedly replied. "I've always been ready to serve you." "Very good. I believe that your people have gotten used to our existence in a month. Now, it's time. I need you to gather a team to assist us in building a camp, not in Everwinter, but in the Kingdom of Wolfheart. We need at least 2,000 people. Of course, the more, the better. Do I need to do manual labor?" Marwain estimated that it would not be difficult to gather so many people from 4 cities. "Leave it to me, Your Excellency. I didn't choose the wrong person." The Sky Lord's voice was filled with satisfaction. "Also, how's the research on the weapons I gave you? Can your people replicate them?" "This." Marwain looked troubled. "It's not a problem to use them, but I'm afraid it'll take some time to replicate them. I've gathered the best blacksmiths in the northern region and let them each forge a part, but the progress isn't ideal. I'm afraid it has something to do with the witches. After all, the blacksmiths told me that the parts don't seem to be made by ordinary people." "I think so too." Fortunately, the Sky Lord did not seem to blame him. "But even so, you should be able to use it to counter the people of Greycastle. This is my second order to you. Send people to stop Greycastle from plundering the people of Wolfheart. I'll give you the other weapons we seized. But I don't have enough knight, then go and recruit them." The Sky Lord interrupted. "Don't you humans like to use this method to expand your subordinates?" He divided his territory and roped in those who had the ability to do things for him. "Don't hesitate to name a price. If you do this well, it won't be difficult for you to become the King of Everwinter." Marwain's body trembled. The King of Everwinter, a title that he had only dared to dream of, had now appeared in front of him in such a way. He suppressed his racing heartbeat and tried his best to control his voice. "Yes, Your Excellency. I'll do my best to complete this task. Hurry up. I want to see the results as soon as possible. I won't let you down." The light from the stone disappeared. Come back in a week." The messenger climbed onto the flesh-winged monster, raised his hands, and soared into the sky. The latter let out a strange cry, flapped its wings, and flew out of the city, quickly disappearing from sight. On the other hand, Marwain's face was covered in flying dust. Damn it! He coughed as he thought to himself, if these demons behaved and spoke like the Sky Lord, they probably wouldn't be known as monsters from hell. After returning to the castle, he immediately called for the old scholar. Although the old scholar's previous performance was rather terrible, and he even wet his pants on top of the city wall, Marwain didn't have a more reliable strategist for the time being. After repeating the Sky Lord's request, Marwain asked, "What do you think?" "Your Excellency, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." The old scholar held his hand excitedly. "Since your father's generation, I've been serving the Parker family. Expanding our power beyond the snow reflection castle has always been his wish. Now that you've not only accomplished the first step, but also have a chance to become the king of Everwinter, we must seize this opportunity no matter what." "I think so too, but, do you think we can really defeat the people of Grey Castle with these knights?" Marwain voiced out his doubts. "You've seen how exquisite those snow powder crossbow bolts are. It's basically impossible to replicate them. And the demons must have a limited number of them. What should we do after we've exhausted them?" "No, Your Excellency, we don't need to fight the army of Grey Castle head-on." The old scholar shook his head. "His Excellency the Sky Lord doesn't plan to do so either. His exact words were, 'Stop the plundering.' As far as I know, the troops of Grey Castle are very scattered. As long as we have equal weapons, we can use strategy to take the initiative. If we can successfully destroy a few raiding squads, they will definitely be restrained. In fact, when I was listening to you, I thought of a brilliant plan." "Oh. Tell me about it." The old scholar whispered his idea into the Duke's ear. Marwain's face immediately lit up. Chapter 1279. In the city of Neverwinter, Grey Castle. 2 days later, Vendi walked into Roland's office with the test records of the 2 new witches. "I have to say, Your Majesty, their abilities are very complicated," Agatha said as she handed Roland the report. "This is the first time I've seen so many variables in one ability. This is only a part of it. I'm afraid you'll have to wait a few more days to figure it out." "Oh." Roland put down his work with great interest and quickly skimmed through the report. "In that case, the Tequila Witches should be very interested, right?" Vendi nodded and said, "They asked Phyllis to test the chosen one as soon as possible. Unfortunately, the light beams of the 2 witches weren't obvious, and they were far from the key of the instrument of divine retribution." Upon hearing this news, Roland was actually relieved. He had just come up with a plan to electrify the whole city, and all the magic cores were being transformed into the Mystery Moon instrument. If the chosen one suddenly appeared, Celine would definitely be full of resentment. After all, it would take decades to adjust the ordinary magic cores to the mode of divine retribution, and it would certainly not be a pleasant experience to squat in front of the magic cores every day. According to Honey, these senior Tequila Witches seemed to be addicted to sunbathing. Instead of lying on their backs under the noon sun, they would climb out of their caves at night and lie there until sunrise. Since the strong light would hurt the carrier, they should not like to go out. Although Roland did not understand why they were doing this, he could tell that they had been quite relaxed recently. This was undoubtedly a good sign. Roland quickly turned to the last page of the report. Thylane's ability mainly affected emotions, which could only take effect after she had taken it. Like most enchantment witches, her ability had a time limit, which depended on the size of the object and the amount of magic power she had invested. The test results showed that the magic potion could affect more than just joy and pain. It could also affect sleepiness, exhaustion, anxiety, fear. As long as it could be experienced by humans, it could more or less affect them. When the effect of the potion was over, these accumulated emotions would burst out all at once. Roland could roughly understand why the effect of the magic potion was extremely complicated, but the light beam was ordinary. In a sense, it was equivalent to a kind of nerve blocker, temporarily delaying the time for the nerve conduction and hormone effect to take effect a little bit later. Some drugs in the future could also do this, but the side effects were great, and it was easy to get addicted. Of course, the simplicity of the light beam was not enough to measure the value of an ability. If Thylane's magic potion was sold in another world, its effect and potential profits would definitely make all the pharmaceutical giants jealous. The mechanisms of various mental diseases were far more complicated and difficult to cure than visible internal and external injuries. Although it could not eliminate the symptoms, it could accurately delay them. As long as it was properly controlled, the impact of the disease could be minimized. For example, anxiety, fatigue, and other negative states mainly hindered people's daily lives. If they could delay the onset of their symptoms until they fell asleep, they would be able to stabilize the digestion without realizing it. Once people no longer suffer from distractions and insomnia, the body's recovery speed is much faster. Even if it was a life-threatening injury, the effect of the magic potion could not be underestimated. People would often lose their willpower in the face of severe pain, which would make it difficult for them to take effective emergency measures. As a result, they would miss the golden opportunity to rescue them. If they could give themselves first aid or hold on until the paramedics arrived, their chances of survival would be much higher. After that, the paramedics would only need to prepare for the severe pain and shock, and they would be able to safely get through the most difficult part of the initial period. In addition, there was more than one witch who could treat pain. Roland remembered his sister mentioning that there was a witch named Della on Sleeping Island who could eliminate pain. There was also the hero of the Witch Union who could transfer non-traumatic diseases to other living creatures. Although it was not clear whether she could transfer mental diseases, it was worth a try. The key was that without Thylane's magic potion, they could not be used effectively. On the battlefield, the soldiers could be seriously injured at any time, but the witches could not do anything else. In fact, many soldiers of the First Army had died on the way to the hospital because they had lost consciousness after being injured and were unable to receive immediate treatment. Now, this situation could be greatly improved. According to Vendi's test results, Thylane could only control the direction of the magic potion, such as negative or positive, but she could not control a specific emotion. This was what most new witches lacked the most, learning to understand and accurately control their own abilities. However, with Vendi and Agatha's guidance, Roland did not have to worry about this. When Thylane could make the magic potion work on a specific emotion, the last weakness of the magic potion would be eliminated. Through the report, he could already see the rise of a giant in the pharmaceutical industry. The market for this industry would undoubtedly be bigger than Chaos Drinks. As for the other witch, Roland stroked the table at the end of the notebook and sighed with emotion. "Your Majesty, this is..." Nightingale also noticed the various colors on the table. She looked up at Vendi and asked, "Are you sure about the content?" "I can only say so. After all, we don't have enough samples to compare in such a short period of time," Vendi replied. "The only thing we can be sure of is that the numbers don't just decrease." To put it simply, the strange numbers that Momo saw could be regarded as the natural time limit of a person's current stage, and the colors represented different trends of decline. In the report, Vendi recorded the results of her and Momo's observation of the entire city of Neverwinter. The color of the residents in the residential area was lighter than that of the refugees in the temporary residential area. She concluded that hunger, disease, defects, and other unhealthy factors could cause the color change, and the darker the color, the smaller the number. She also mentioned an example. After a migrant from the kingdom of Wolfheart drank the purification water, the number above his head increased from a dark brown 5 to a 7. If this ability was accurate, it could be assumed that this migrant was suffering from some sort of infectious disease. Based on his current state, he only had 5 years left to live. However, after the treatment with the purification water, the stage was changed, and the ability re-evaluated the time limit. Although Vendi did not know the specific meaning of the different colors, she could generally regard them as unhealthy. "Your Majesty." Nightingale's face revealed a worried expression. "It's better than expected, isn't it?" Roland comforted her. "At least it can increase back to normal as long as we use the right method." Vendi opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but she held back in the end. Chapter 1280. Roland took a piece of draft paper from the table and roughly calculated the average age of the residents in the residential area and the temporary residential area. He concluded that the average age of the residents in Neverwinter was between 40 and 50, while the average age of the residents in Neverwinter was only about 35. Roland could see many problems from this point alone. Generally speaking, the increase and decline of the average lifespan was a long-term process. At the beginning, the living standard of the residents in Border Town was obviously not much better than that of the refugees. In just 5 years, the local residents' lifespan had increased by a level, and Nana and Lily were undoubtedly the biggest contributors. She can get thousands of data in 2 days. Does Momo need to look at them one by one when she uses her ability? Roland asked. Yes. If she has enough magic power, she can see the numbers of all the people in her field of vision at the same time. Wendy replied softly, but it seems that she has never done this before, and she has never tested her limits. She feels that her ability is a curse. Even if she knows it, she can't do anything about it. It's like watching the people around her die little by little. Nightingale sighed. Curse? Nothing but bringing misfortune. Roland thought disapprovingly, that's a big mistake. When a country developed to a certain extent, any government order could have a very far-reaching impact. The traditional village management obviously could not keep up with the changing pace of the situation, so the significance of statistics came from this. Summarizing, observing, and tracking the changes in these statistics, and making targeted adjustments to the details of the government order could be said to be an indispensable ability for any organization that wanted to enter the threshold of modern times, and the change in the average lifespan was a very important part of it. If they used conventional methods to record the data, not only would they need enough basic departments and manpower, but it would also take decades of perseverance to see initial results. After all, no one knew how long people could live before they died. At present, except for Neverwinter, the other cities in Greycastle had only just established a secondary city hall that could carry out government orders. It was common for them to have 1 or 2 staff members, let alone to carry out the detailed population statistics of the residential areas and streets. In fact, Scroll had a lot to do with the fact that the information system for the residents of Neverwinter was so complete. When the administrative office had enough manpower to send literate people to work in grassroots organizations such as the Neighborhood Committee, then Neverwinter would truly meet the requirements of an all-powerful government. On the other hand, Momo could help Greycastle skip the time accumulation stage and build a preliminary statistical system in a situation where everything was lacking. This was the so-called cooking without rice, and this was under the situation where Greycastle only had a superficial understanding of her abilities. By the time Wendy found out the specific meanings of the colors, such as the effects of diseases, hunger, and environmental factors, she would be able to easily obtain a large and detailed database. Not to mention, this data also had the effect of prediction. As long as it was used properly, this ability could bring benefits to almost every aspect of the kingdom's operations. The nobles in the kingdom of Wolfheart had no idea what they had missed. In Roland's eyes, Momo was already an honorable member of the administrative office. In the future, she would at least be a minister. By the way, has Nana's treatment schedule been arranged? Roland asked as he closed the notebook. Wendy nodded. It's today. Do you want to go with me? The medical center was one of the busiest areas in the city, especially after the end of the war. Nana Pine was no exception. Although she did not need to stay in the laboratory for a long time like Anna, she was already booked for treatment every day. It was said that there were hundreds of people in the queue and it was still increasing. This was also related to the characteristics of her ability. When she treated a severed limb, all her magic power would be consumed in about a quarter of an hour. As a result, people who lost more than a palm would not be able to apply for treatment. Instead, they would be issued a disability certificate as a substitute. When Nana became an adult or her ability evolved, her magic power would greatly increase. Only then could these injured people jump the queue for treatment. Speaking of which, Nana's day of adulthood should be this year's Months of Demons. Roland thought. For some reason, whenever he mentioned the little girl who used to be in the same class as Anna, the first image that came to his mind was her holding a chicken in her hands and angrily accusing him. "All right, I'll go with you." Momo did not expect that she would not be driven away after showing her ability. Instead, she would be warmly accepted by Vendi. Now, she and Thylane both lived in the witch building and became members of the witch union. Every time after dinner, other witches would come to visit Momo. Some of them brought delicious food that Momo did not know the name of, and some of them would kindly instruct Momo on how to use the equipment in the room and what they needed to pay attention to in the castle district. In just 2 days, Momo's view of the world had changed dramatically. She had never thought that being alive was such a wonderful thing. When Momo learned that she still had a chance to see her eyes again, she threw herself into Vendi's arms and burst into tears. This was the only place where her tears could flow freely. "Don't worry." Vendi patted her on the back and comforted her. Although Nana rarely lives in the witch building, she's also a member of the witch union. She's about the same age as you. I'm sure she'll be happy to cure you. On the appointed day, Momo was taken to the hospital by Belle. On the way to the hospital, Momo had already learned about the basic situation of the healing witches from Belle. Unlike Momo, Miss Pine was not only born into a noble family, but also had great abilities. She was known as the Little Angel of Neverwinter and had been living in the clouds since the beginning. Momo could almost imagine Miss Pine's appearance. She was a lovely girl who always wore beautiful clothes with a smile on her face and behaved gracefully. Anyone who saw her would have a good impression of her. Therefore, when Belle called her into the treatment room, Momo was a little nervous and even felt a sense of inferiority. She lowered her head slightly. "Is this the person who's going to be treated next?" A clear voice came into her ears. "Yes, her name is Momo. She's also a witch, just like you." Momo felt strangely familiar with the voice. She could not help but look at the speaker in surprise. It was His Majesty. It was at this moment that she saw the legendary Miss Angel. The next moment, Momo used all her strength to stop herself from screaming. Nana Pine was wearing a white coat that covered her whole body, only her eyes were exposed. Not to mention beautiful and gorgeous, even ordinary people's clothes would not be simple to this degree. Chapter 1281. "Ah, don't worry, it's not my blood." Nana took off her robe with the help of Belle. "It's just that the injured person's arm was crushed by the rolling mill, so it's inevitable that the scene will be a bit chaotic." Is that so? Yes. Come, let me see your injury. What a strong aura. Are they really the same age?" Momo swallowed, carefully took off her blindfold, and slowly walked toward Nana. "Well, it's similar to what Sister Vendi said. The magic power should be enough." After the examination, the little girl handed her a bowl of medicine and then patted the bed next to her. "Drink it and lie down. It'll take about 10 minutes. Momo did as she was told, but she was stunned to see the little girl take out a knife. Your Majesty. Vendi." She looked at the two people beside her, as if asking for help, and her voice became sobbing. "Come on, Nana," Vendi said helplessly. "Can't you take it slow and give the new sister some time to adapt?" "Hey, this is a normal procedure," Nana said in surprise. "If we don't cut open the old wound and completely destroy the healed part, the treatment won't work." "That's right, but you can chat with her first, then talk about the previous case. I think it's more convenient to use a saw than an axe when cutting off a limb." "No, I'm not talking about that, indeed," His Majesty chimed in. "A saw can ensure that the cut is basically neat, but if it's a big bone like a leg, it'll be very difficult to cut it, right? The skull is not much better. Those nurses are not much stronger than me. If Sister Anna can help, it'll be much easier. It's my fault. But it's not difficult to solve. How about I design an electric one for you later? I guarantee it'll be broken." "Your Majesty. Please don't talk about this." "Ahem, sorry, when it comes to technical problems, I can't help it," her voice became vague. Momo turned her head and vaguely saw that Nana seemed to be talking with His Majesty and Vendi. From time to time, Nana moved the knife in her hand back and forth, as if she wanted to experiment on her body. Cut. Saw. An axe? I'm sorry. She slowly closed her eyes. Lane, I might not be able to see you again after this treatment. Ah, she fell asleep. Roland suddenly noticed that Momo had already closed her eyes and entered a stable state of sleep. Nana raised the scalpel and nodded to the two. Then I'll begin. She skillfully cut into the eye socket, removed the ugly old wound, and cleaned the damaged skin. Blood quickly seeped out and dyed the gauze red. Throughout the entire process, her arms were almost completely still. Only her fingertips and wrists were moving with precision. Unlike the treatment, this step could not be achieved by magic power. It was the result of Nana's training so far. Amazing. Vendi said in a low voice. It's all forced out. Nana twitched her mouth. When I was in the military camp, I could only stay for about half a minute for each patient. If I couldn't complete the emergency treatment in the shortest time possible, I probably wouldn't be able to save the later patients. That's why she's so straightforward. Roland could not help but sigh. You used to faint at the sight of blood, and those chickens, Your Majesty. Nana rolled her eyes at him. Don't ever mention that again. And you're the culprit. Fine. Roland waved his hand in surrender. Besides. The little girl paused. I think it's good to be like this. At least I'm much stronger than before, right? For a moment, Roland felt as if he had seen her again. Roland could not help but stroke her head. Of course. A few minutes later, Momo's eyes returned to normal. A bowl of sleeping fern will probably last for about 2 hours. Such a small amount of poison won't have too much of an effect on the witch, so we just have to wait for her to wake up naturally, Nana said, looking at Wendy. Thank you. The latter nodded with a smile. By the way, how much magic power do you have left? Roland deliberately pretended to be careless. Can you check for me? Wendy's complexion couldn't help but change, while Nana directly grabbed his arm. Are you hurt? No. I just feel that my nose gets stuffy recently. Then you should go to Lily. Nana withdrew her hand grumpily. I've checked, and there's no reaction from her ability. I think so too. Roland slightly tilted his head to avoid Vendy's puzzled gaze. It seems that Nana's ability is not omnipotent. Roland thought. I don't know if she can't cure those invisible, hidden diseases, or if the red unhealthy state is not a kind of injury. Anyway, I can only wait and find out. When Momo slowly opened her eyes, she saw a sea of red clouds. The overlapping clouds were turning from gold to purple and drifting away from the afterglow. She could hear the soft but continuous sound of the autumn wind blowing through the grass. Occasionally, she could see 1 or 2 blades of grass flying in the air and passing by her cheeks. Everything was peaceful and quiet. I'm still alive, Momo thought. However, Momo soon noticed something unusual. Her vision seemed to expand a lot, and the blurry scenes in the distance became clearer. She raised her head slightly and saw Lane leaning over her with a smile. You're awake. Momo realized that she had been lying on her friend's lap and that they were on the lawn in front of the witch building. How long have I been asleep? Where's Vendi? She left after giving you to me, Lane shrugged. Lane shrugged and said, you probably slept for most of the afternoon. Although Wendy said that you would wake up in 2 hours, you don't have to worry. This is a common symptom after you recover your magic power. When you wake up naturally, your body will adapt better. Can you see with your new eyes? Momo sat up and looked around. Ever since her eyes were dug out, she had thought that she would always be in darkness. She had never expected that she could see again. What should I do, Lane? She murmured. What do you mean? If that's the case, how are we going to repay them? Lane was stunned for a moment and then chuckled. She looked up at the sky and said, I don't know. However, according to Sister Wendy, as long as we work hard, it should be a kind of repayment. By the way, when you were still asleep, Wendy had already arranged what I had to do. Together with Miss Nana Pine, who healed you, I'm going to provide medical care and treatment for Greycastle. At this point, she scratched her nose and seemed a little embarrassed. Although I still don't quite understand what kind of treatment I can provide, but my ability. Momo clenched her fists. Sister Wendy also said that. She looked up in surprise. Really? Yes. Thylane nodded. And it was His Majesty's idea. He hopes that you can join the administrative office and work with Lady Scroll to run the kingdom. Huh? Momo could not believe her ears. Can I do that? You have to ask yourself that question, Thylane said as she gave Momo a push. I don't even know what I'm doing. But, as long as you learn, you'll figure it out eventually. I'm not as confident as you are. Momo murmured and leaned against Thylane's back. Do you think we can live here forever? Just like home. In fact, I asked Wendy the same question. Huh? After a moment of silence, Thylane's companion answered. Chapter 1282. A week later, Roland received 2 pieces of good news. First, Iron Axe used the napalm to give the demons a head-on blow, which temporarily slowed down the demons' advance in the north. In the letter, the commander-in-chief described the explosion of the new weapon in detail, which was even more amazing than the experimental results. In fact, the use of fire to restrain demons had been used as early as the first battle of Divine Will. At that time, human beings had set the forests behind the demons on fire many times and caused forest fires that lasted for several days, so that the red mist could not gather at the front line. Because of this, the demons learned their lesson and destroyed forests, grasslands, and even farmlands in order to prevent the demons' supplies from being interrupted. At the same time, even if they were in the area covered by the red mist, they would set up small stone tower camps similar to outposts, just in case. As long as there was red mist in the camps, even if there was a fire in the rear, the demons could hold on until the fire was put out. There was no doubt that Iron Axe and the general staff had been inspired by the above examples, which was why they had planned this siege. The advantage of napalm was that it carried its own fuel, which could cause a raging fire even in an open space, and it was extremely difficult to put out with water. However, no one had expected that the fire would not last long, and it would cause a deflagration that covered the whole city. If only I could ask Summer to reconstruct the scene, Roland thought regretfully. If he could find out the cause, he would be able to use napalm to deal a devastating blow to the demons in the future. Unfortunately, according to the time, the Tusk City should have been swallowed by the red mist again, so it was impossible to sneak in again. Moreover, Roland was quite distressed to use up more than 500 barrels of napalm at one time. After all, the production of oil could be increased as long as more manpower was invested. The key was that the rubber worm's mucus had an affinity with animal blood, which could only be slowly accumulated by the Ministry of Agriculture. Nevertheless, the victory was more important than anything else. In his reply, Roland not only encouraged Iron Axe, but also distributed more than 100 barrels of napalm to the front line. The second piece of good news was that the assembly factory of Fire of Heaven finally had its first biplane successfully rolled off the production line. After he got the news from Anna, he immediately rushed to the factory site with Tilly. This brand new factory was built at the same time as the Air Knight Academy. Compared to the steam engine factory built with bricks and stones 2 or 3 years ago, this new factory was designed to take into account the needs of high-end manufacturing. The steel structure made it have a very wide space inside, which could be used to assemble and repair more than 10 aircrafts at the same time. Lighting lamps hung all over the ceiling. Coupled with the bright and clean terrazzo floor, it could be described as magnificent. Even Tilly couldn't help but exclaim when she approached the factory gate. If it was someone who didn't know the inside story, it wouldn't be strange to think that this place was a palace. In terms of personnel and equipment, Roland had also put in a lot of effort. Not only did he transfer the most experienced managers and workers from various workshops, he also used the third generation of machine tools that were driven by electricity to meet the needs of cutting-edge production. This made it the largest power consumer in the industrial area. If not for the appearance of the Mystery Moon instrument, he would have had to suspend the power supply of other factories to make it run at full capacity. It could be said that the achievements and accumulation of Neverwinter in the past 5 years were all reflected in this new factory. Roland even heard from Berev that the people of Neverwinter were proud to work in this factory. According to the plan, when the new factory was officially put into operation, each of its workstations would undertake a specialized assembly task. From the first workstation to the last, it basically involved the whole process of the aircraft's gradual formation. The body of the aircraft would start from the riveting of the skeleton, attaching the wings, loading the spare parts, pasting the skin, and finally leaving the factory for testing. But now, the factory was far from reaching the ideal state. Apart from the workstation closest to the exit of the factory, where a Fire of Heaven was being painted, the other workstations were empty. How is it? Did the production run into trouble? Roland walked to Anna. Too many to count. Anna shook her head. You don't know how many spare parts and materials the workers have scrapped in order to make this qualified product. Looking at her helpless expression, he could not help but laugh. When he first made this decision, Roland had already anticipated the difficulties. It was almost impossible to master new materials and new installation techniques in a short period of time, and this was under the circumstance that he had tried his best to reduce the difficulty. For example, the joint parts of the aircraft used a new single-sided riveting technology. For this purpose, he specially set up a production line specifically for the production of various types of core rivets and core pulling rivets required for the biplane. Compared to the traditional double-sided rivets, this kind of joint could be fixed with only a knock or core pulling. It had lower requirements for the workers and was more convenient to install. In addition, he also used the experience of model assembly in the later generations for reference. While fixing all the parts with a fixed number, he expressed each assembly step in the form of a diagram. Furthermore, he set up a fool's interface on some easily confused parts to further reduce the possibility of carelessness leading to the wrong installation. Even so, in nearly half a month, the workers only managed to produce a finished product. One could imagine the difficulty. So did you personally participate? Tilly suddenly asked. Not really. Anna shrugged. She would only reveal this unsteady demeanor in front of a few people. Roland asked me to only be responsible for commanding. No matter what trouble they encountered, I had to let them solve it themselves. Although there were several times when I almost couldn't control myself. Tilly laughed. So you're actually very happy, aren't you? Because one of them was successful. Anna could not help but smile. I knew I couldn't hide it from you. If there's one, there will be a second one. When all the workers get started, I think there will soon be more qualified aircraft. Speaking of this, Tilly paused, turned her head and glanced at Roland. It would be even better if you praised her at this time. I didn't count on him. Anna curled her lips. Roland was confused. What was going on? Weren't they discussing the production of the aircraft? Why did the topic change to him? At this moment, a personal guard ran over. Your Majesty, all the factory preparations for the first Fire of Heaven have been completed. The celebration ceremony can begin at any time. Roland shifted his attention back to the biplane. He saw two newly painted symbols on the light gray fuselage. One was the royal coat of arms of Greycastle, and the other was a knight holding a spear and spreading his wings. The entire aircraft looked majestic, but he felt that something was missing. He pondered for a moment, then came to a sudden realization. He waved his hand and said, "Attach the ribbon." Soon, the bright red ribbon was attached to the aircraft, and a large red flower was attached to the propeller at the nose of the aircraft. That's right. He nodded in satisfaction. This was the perfect condition for the Fire of Heaven to leave the factory. Following that was a speech, ribbon cutting, and a group photo. Roland, Anna, Tilly, and all the contributors and workers who had participated in the design and manufacture of the aircraft stood together. Behind them was the brand new red biplane numbered 001. Look at me here. 1, 2, 3. Chapter 1283. Your Excellency, Frost Town is just ahead of us. A knight reported. Marwayne Parker raised his binoculars and observed the situation in the town. This place was located at the southwest border of the Kingdom of Everwinter and the Kingdom of Wolfheart. There were hills all around, and one could clearly see the situation in the town from any vantage point. Frost Town was easy to attack and difficult to defend, so it had never been built into a castle. There were many towns like this on the border between the two kingdoms, and there was nothing special about it. Normally, Marwayne wouldn't even spare it a second glance, but now, it had a unique significance. Did you get any news from the scouts? Yes. I only spent a few silver royals, and the townspeople told me everything, the knight said proudly. There's indeed a group of Grey Castle soldiers here. There aren't many of them, only about 40 to 50 people. They show up every once in a while. Why don't they station here? It's a mountain road after the border, and I heard that wild wolves often appear. Without an escort, none of the refugees will be able to cross the border. Marwayne immediately understood what was going on. The red mist did not spread along the border. Instead, it spread in an ever-expanding semicircle. The furthest part of the red mist had already passed the royal city of the Kingdom of Wolfheart, and the closest part was still in the Kingdom of Everwinter. Compared to going to a neighboring kingdom, it was more reassuring to fight within the kingdom. Frost Town not only met this requirement, but also because of its remote location, those who had been fooled by Grey Castle soldiers would rarely enter the Kingdom of Wolfheart from here. Frost Town was almost as inconspicuous as a mosquito's leg compared to the major cities with convenient transportation. What Marwayne wanted was precisely the small number of people. The small number of people meant that Grey Castle soldiers would not pay too much attention to this place, which was undoubtedly confirmed by the scouts. Just as the old scholar had said, the demons would deal with those who were difficult to deal with. What Marwayne needed to do was to bite them where they were weak. As long as this matter was spread out, no matter how big or small the outcome of the battle was, it would make the other side hesitate in taking action. Of course, that was not all the old scholar's plan. There were even more ruthless tricks waiting for the people of Grey Castle. If he could succeed 2 or 3 times, he believed that the other party's plundering operation would suffer a great setback. Perhaps the Sky Lord would also rely on him more. Let's go back. It's time to have a good talk with everyone. After spending half a day on the road to the nearest town, Marwayne entered the former lord's mansion in high spirits. This place originally belonged to a nameless baron, but not long ago, he was so scared by the approaching red mist and the rumors of demons that he fled, which saved him a lot of time to negotiate. This land didn't belong to him yet. After all, his power was limited to the 4 cities of the northern region. However, Marwayne believed that the Parker family's expansion wouldn't stop there. Soon, a group of nobles gathered together and waited for him to speak. The Duke looked around and silently memorized everyone's faces and expressions. There were a total of 45 applicants in the room. Most of them were knight, but there were also a few baron. The one with the highest status was the former lord of the northernmost port, Viscount Narnos. These people had either been forced to lose their territories or had all their people stolen by the people of Grey Castle. With the promise of fiefdom as a reward, they did not hesitate to pledge their allegiance to him. If the guards, trusted aides, and squires that they had brought with them were also included, the number of soldiers in this army was already more than 300. They had the advantage in numbers, so this was obviously an excellent opportunity. More importantly, for the first time, there was no difference in weapons between them and their opponents. In the past, the nobles of Everwinter had been unable to put up a fight because the firearms of the people of Grey Castle were too ferocious. The speed and range of their fire were far beyond that of their imitation snow powder weapons. If not for this batch of reinforcements from the Sky Lord, no nobles would be willing to help him fight against the people of Grey Castle, let alone 300 people. How is everyone's preparation going? Marwain cleared his throat. I believe your men are familiar with those firearms, right? Isn't it just loading bullets into the gun, aiming at the target, and pulling the trigger? Viscount Narnos said indignantly. Those things that even the farmers in the mountains can use, there's no reason we can't use them. Those guys who were captured had to be tortured heavily before they confessed, and they even spoke hesitantly and unwillingly. I thought they were nothing special. That's right. It's true that they're exquisite and beyond our reach, but when it comes to using them, they're much easier than swords. A knight echoed. I've also interrogated the people of Greycastle. They've only been in the army for 2 years and can usually learn how to use firearms in a month, but I've spent 5 years just practicing with my sword. A month is because those untouchables are too slow. If it were me, 3 days would be enough. Another person's comment caused a burst of laughter. I'll let them know that without firearms, they're nothing. Aren't firearms all thanks to the witches? I think the king of Greycastle just took advantage of the time when the church was sweeping through the kingdom of Everwinter and the kingdom of Wolfheart. The hearts of the people were useful. Marwain realized that these nobles had been suppressing their anger for a long time and were eager to take revenge on the people of Greycastle. Although this mixed team had just been put together a week ago and some of them did not even know each other's names, at least they had the same goal and were full of vigor. However, the number of those crossbow bolts is limited, and the number of bullets distributed to each of us is even smaller. The knight who had followed him before spread out his hands and said, if possible, I hope you can use them sparingly and only open fire when the distance is close. Marwain looked at him approvingly. This man was called Fuller, a native of the western region. He had brought him here because he liked his quick-wittedness. From these words, Marwain knew that Fuller had already grasped the key to victory. It would be great if he could find a chance to recruit him. Don't worry, the Duke said confidently. The people of Greycastle don't have many bullets either. There are many mountains in the northwest of the kingdom of Wolfheart, which limits their carrying capacity. Besides, they'll let us get close. Isn't it their slogan to escort the refugees out of danger? The others also sneered. That's right. As long as the enemies came to rob people, they would definitely not give up on this wave of easily obtained lambs. However, they did not know that sometimes, the wolf pack would also hide among them. In this world, the hunter often became the prey in the blink of an eye. By the time they realized that it was a trap, they would already be trapped in a cage. After that, as long as they disguised themselves as the enemies and looted the towns along the way, the propaganda of the people of Greycastle would definitely collapse. If they did this a few more times, they wouldn't be able to pull another person away. Chapter 1284. When Fishball climbed over the rugged hilltop, the view in front of him suddenly became clear. Orange-yellow wildflowers were blooming all over the ground, forming a sharp contrast with the barren mountain path. When the autumn wind blew, waves would appear in the sea of flowers. This kind of beautiful scenery created by nature would always be able to lift the spirits of tired travelers. The town in the middle of the sea of flowers was their destination, Frost Town. This was the 6th time he had crossed the valley. Although Fishball was the squad leader of the High Gear Squad, he was also a soldier of the First Army. With the order to speed up the evacuation, many soldiers like him also joined the emergency rescue. Since the evacuation, the demons had not attacked this route. Perhaps it was because it was too far away from the red mist, or the demons did not care about the refugees. But no matter what, every person he brought back to Neverwinter was a force to be reckoned with in Neverwinter. Meanwhile, he had already brought nearly 1,000 people to the rear. According to the usual practice, this team would set up camp outside the town and then send someone to negotiate with the remaining refugees before evacuating them in batches. When they first came here, the First Army had warned the residents that the road ahead was dangerous and it was best not to go south without permission. As long as they waited in the town for a few days, the army of Greycastle would escort them out. Of course, not everyone would believe this. In fact, Fishball had encountered many refugees on the way. They either ran out of food or were driven into a corner by wild beasts. However, this was already a relatively lucky outcome. Those who were even more unlucky died silently in the valley. But this time, Fishball noticed something different. Looking down from the hillside, he saw that the Frost Town, which had always been sparsely populated, was now crowded. Did a big city collapse? Hansen, a scout in the same team, whistled. So many refugees in just 10 days. We're going to be very busy. Fishball was also very excited. Previously, he had only gathered about 1,000 people after 1 or 2 months. This time, he believed that they would be able to catch up with or even surpass the previous number. Although he did not know why these refugees did not choose other routes but gathered in this town at the bottom of the valley, as long as they were here, the First Army had the obligation to take them to a safe place. Thinking of this, everyone couldn't help but quicken their pace. Going downhill was much easier than going uphill. Half an hour later, the team arrived at the camp in Frost Town. The refugees in the town also noticed their arrival. Many people rushed to the streets and quickly gathered into a stream of people, rushing in their direction. These people, aren't they a little too impatient? Someone joked. Didn't I tell them to wait in the town? Could it be that they've run out of food and are hoping to get some food from us? Most of the people agreed with this statement. If it's really a disaster in a nearby city, it's normal that they didn't bring enough food. Fishball quickly made a decision. But it's not good for us to do a head count and maintain order, so we still have to stop them. 10 of you will help me set up the checkpoint. The rest of you will be on guard. He knew very well how terrifying it would be if the crowd went out of control. If they could not stop the refugees, the begging would turn into a robbery, and these people would be no different from bandits. Most of the time, these two types of people were separated by a thin line. Yes. The soldiers quickly spread out and held the guns on their backs in their hands. As the distance between the two sides shortened, the figures of the refugees became clearer. Fishball raised the megaphone, turned it to the loudest volume, and shouted, "This is the rescue team of the First Army of Greycastle. Please don't panic. Stop immediately and stay where you are for further instructions. We have enough food and medicine, but we need your cooperation to distribute them. I repeat, stop, or we'll take forceful measures." The crowd hesitated for a moment, but soon they started running again as if something was pushing them from behind. Fishball frowned and asked his teammates to aim their guns at the sky, ready to fire a warning shot. Just then, Hansen let out a soft cry. "Huh? What's wrong?" Fishball asked. "Monitor, their clothes seem a little strange," Hansen said while observing through the telescope. "Have you ever seen a refugee carrying a roll of cloth?" "A roll of cloth?" Fishball was puzzled. He snatched the telescope and looked at the crowd. The distance between the two sides was about 300 meters, and he could roughly see their clothes and belongings through the telescope. From the way they were dressed, they were indeed a group of runaways in dire straits. But just as the scout had said, most of them had a long or short strip of cloth on their bodies. Some of them were carried on their backs, while others were hung at their waists. It was strange no matter how one looked at it. It was human nature for refugees to take all their belongings with them before they fled. The First Army would usually ask them to abandon their luggage and travel light, but they would not interfere with things that would not cause trouble or inconvenience to the migration, such as gold royals. Over the past 2 months, Fishball had seen many strange belongings, but this was the first time he had seen a roll of cloth. But the more he looked, the more he felt that something was wrong. The refugees were dressed in rags, and they were all wearing shoes. Their ragged clothes did not look old at all, but looked like they had been damaged recently. The distance between the two sides was now less than 200 meters. Bang! His teammates fired a warning shot. The crowd immediately dispersed, and a scene that made Fishball's blood freeze appeared. Probably startled by the gunshot, several people at the front of the line hurriedly pulled off the cloth, revealing the standard-issue rifle of the First Army. This action seemed to set off a wave in the crowd, and the others followed suit. Those cloth strips of different lengths were actually used to hide weapons, and the things wrapped under them ranged from swords to halberds. It could be said that there was everything one could think of. He suddenly realized that this was a trap. Retreat to the camp. Fishball shouted at his teammates. Run! Before his voice died away, a series of gunshots came from the other side. Fishball could even hear the whooshing sound of bullets flying past his ears, and from time to time, the surrounding grass splashed with mud. The other 9 people also came to their senses, and they all turned around and rushed back to the camp. The team had camped there several times. Although there were no blockhouses or trenches, the simple sandstone barracks were still there. It was originally built to defend against the demons, but now it was the only shelter on the empty hillside. When Fishball crawled and ran into the barracks, there was no one left standing. Compared to the incessant gunshots from the opposite side, the return fire from the camp was very scattered. Compared to the 9 people who had set up the barracks, the team of more than 40 people was obviously a more eye-catching target. Fishball's heart almost jumped out of his throat when he thought that they would probably be shot at while they were defenseless. He grabbed Hansen and said, "Quick, go and check on the others." After Hansen ran away with his body crouched, Fishball raised his gun and aimed at the refugees, who were surrounding them from all directions. No, they were definitely not refugees, but nobles who had defected to the demons. Only the demons could have so many weapons from the First Army. Damn it, Fishball thought bitterly. He never expected that his own kind would use the refugees to set up such a trap. Don't they know whose accomplice they are? Squad leader, Hansen came back faster than Fishball had expected, and it only took him a few seconds. Everyone is fine. Only one person is slightly injured, but it's been bandaged. It won't affect the battle. Fishball was stunned. Only one person is injured. The gunshots were so fierce just now. Chapter 1285. That's right, they had to hold on. Behind the campsite was a gentle hillside, so it was almost impossible to retreat to the hilltop under the hail of bullets. Moreover, the rescue teams had split up, so they could not get reliable support in a short period of time. In such a disadvantageous situation, holding on was the only way to inflict the greatest damage to the enemy. After all, the difference in numbers between the 2 sides was too great. Moreover, everyone's backpack was filled with food, clothes, and other supplies, and they did not even bring a single heavy machine gun. As a result, the weapons on both sides were basically at the same level, and it was difficult to rely on long-range firepower to make up for the lack of numbers like in the past. 50 versus 1,000. Fishball could already foresee the result. He admitted that he was still a little afraid when this idea popped up in his mind, but he was no longer a coward who could only cover his head and cower. Fear would not affect his duty as a squad leader. Even if he were to die here, he would make the other party pay the price. Obviously, his teammates had the same idea, or else they would not have deliberately suppressed their shooting speed and let the enemy come within 200 meters of them. They had limited bullets, so they could only achieve the best hit rate when fighting at a medium or close range. Of course, the enemy's accuracy would also increase as the distance shortened. This was a double-edged sword, and willpower determined everything. The hillside slowed down the enemy's movement. Fishball waited for nearly a minute before he saw someone enter the 100-meter radius. At this distance, he could already see the faces of the sneak attackers through the telescope. This once again confirmed his previous conjecture. Most of them had clean faces and did not look like refugees who had been fleeing in the wind and rain. Their actions and expressions did not show any signs that they were being forced. He no longer had to worry about killing innocent people. Fishball aimed at the enemy at the front and pulled the trigger. His teammates also chose to open fire at the same time. For a moment, the sound of gunfire in the campsite suddenly drowned out the enemy's movements. In the blink of an eye, the attackers at the front fell, and the momentum of the attack was immediately halted. The surrounding enemies all lay down and fired back at the First Army. It was unknown whether they had learned this method from previous battles or if they had been taught by the demons, but the situation became a mutual shooting. While the 2 sides were in a deadlock, the enemies at the back pushed several 2-wheeled carts covered with cloth to the front line. Fishball was no stranger to this kind of thing. Compared to carriages and mules, handcarts that relied on human labor were more suitable for ordinary people, especially when the whole family was moving and needed to carry large amounts of goods. He had originally thought that they were just props used by the enemy to conceal their identity, but he did not expect that after they started charging, the enemy still did not give up on these cumbersome carts. It wasn't until the cloth was lifted that Fishball realized that the cart was actually carrying a Mark IHMG. The rapid firing immediately suppressed the firepower of the First Army, and the bullets equipped with tracer effects were much more accurate than those of bolt rifles. It was as if the area in front of the camp was boiling. The grassland full of blooming wildflowers and soil were splattered everywhere. If not for the defense of the camp, they would have lost the ability to fight back. Fortunately, the enemy didn't set up a machine gun position at the furthest point, but instead threw it into the assault. Now that the machine guns were only about 200 meters away from the defensive line, and the First Army was spread out far enough, this gave them a chance to catch their breath. "Hanson!" Fishball yelled. Hanson gestured that he understood and ran to the edge of the camp with his rifle. The First Army rarely encountered a situation where they were at a disadvantage in firepower. According to the regulations in the combat manual, once they were at a disadvantage in firepower, they should call for backup from the rear as soon as possible, or specifically target the enemy's firepower to counterattack. Obviously, the only action the rescue team could take at this time was to use efficient and accurate sniping to deter the enemy's attack. While the machine guns were reloading, Fishball and his teammates raised their heads and fired ferociously, trying to attract the enemy's attention. Hanson did not disappoint. He shot down the shooters on the cart with 2 shots. Those who wanted to climb onto the cart were also shot down one by one. Without the suppression of the machine guns, the enemy who had taken advantage of the momentum to charge forward were beaten back by a round of gunfire before they could run more than 10 steps. The battle was back to square one. Damn it, why haven't these useless people conquered the camp yet? Marwain looked up at the gradually setting sun and stamped his feet impatiently. Viscount Narnos, aren't your men too timid? They can't even take down a flank. If this drags on until nightfall, the Grey Castle people will escape. As commanders, they naturally did not have to rush to the front line like squires and mercenaries. Moreover, the Grey Castle people never followed the rules of War of the Nobles. They did not deliberately hold back or exchange their captives for ransom. None of that existed. They had long seen how the Grey Castle people treated the nobles. If they led the charge like before, they would not receive any honor or respect, but would only be the first to be shot full of holes. They've tried their best, and your men aren't any better, Narnos said discontentedly. They have the most men, but the front line is the furthest back. If your central force could advance another 100 steps, the camp would have been conquered long ago. Marwain was speechless. He could only look at the front line gloomily, but he remembered this hatred in his heart. When I become the Lord of Everwinter, I'll make you pay. But the most important thing now was to win. Without victory, the Sky Lord would not treat him differently. But he did not understand why the situation had become so stalemate. Everything went smoothly according to plan. In order to prevent the Grey Castle people from discovering a flaw, they did not choose to set up an ambush in the town, nor did they split up to outflank the enemy. In this valley, the strength and arrangement of both sides could be seen at a glance. Marwain had carefully considered any detail that could lead to exposure. As for the townspeople who might leak the news, he did not let any of them escape. And that was how things developed. By the time the Grey Castle people realized something was wrong, the distance between the two sides had already shortened to a few hundred steps. Since they outnumbered the enemy with guns and had far more men, the battle should have ended quickly. But why was the stalemate so long and they still could not break into the camp? Even if the enemy had 1 gun each, there would only be about 50 guns, while the allied forces of the nobles had more than 200 guns. In Marwain's imagination, the Grey Castle people should have been scared out of their wits when faced with such fierce firepower. But what he saw seemed to be the other way around. The allied forces were pressed down on the hillside and could not move. Several times, they charged forward but were repelled by the intense gunfire. The counterattack of the Allied forces was not enough to weaken the defense of the Grey Castle people. It was as if the enemy had 3 heads and 6 arms and could control a few guns at the same time. The continuous firing guns that he had high hopes for were even more useless. Not only did they not destroy the will of the Grey Castle people, but they also hit their own people when they charged. Looking from the foot of the hillside, he saw that the continuous firing guns that he had painstakingly transported up the hill were surrounded by corpses. No one dared to touch them anymore. If this continued, wouldn't the beautiful future that he had been looking forward to turn into a bubble? After all, the kingdom of Everwinter could not produce bullets. If he could not seize enough ammunition in this battle, how would he have the chance to bite a piece of meat off the Grey Castle people in the next battle? Don't be impatient, my lord, Fleur comforted him. According to my observation, the enemy's gunfire has become much more sparse than before. Obviously, they are running out of ammunition. As long as we hold on a little longer, we can use the method that we are best at to win. After all, they only have guns, but we have everything. Chapter 1286. Fishball noticed the change in the battle situation. He had been fighting with the mentality that he would knock out the enemy even if he had to die, but the pressure from the enemy was much lower than he had expected. When he fought the demons on the fertile plains, the pressure on the battlefield almost made it hard for him to breathe. His whole body was as stiff as a rock, and the only thought in his mind was to shoot. But now, he still had the energy to observe the situation of his teammates and the enemy, and to think about the enemy's possible actions. After being forced to retreat several times, the enemy's movements became much more sluggish. The most obvious point was that the First Army's firing interval had lengthened. In order to conserve ammunition, they usually only fired when the nobles' army charged, but the last time they fired was an hour ago. Since the enemy had not sent any reinforcements, this kind of stalemate, of neither advancing nor retreating, was definitely a taboo. After all, the First Army was positioned halfway down the slope, and they had the cover of the sandstone barracks, so they had a much greater advantage in firing. He did not quite understand why the commander of the nobles would make such a choice. Unlike cold weapons, no contact did not mean that there was no battle. Those ambushers were under the pressure of being hit at every moment, and this was undoubtedly a blow to their morale. Some of the front lines did not advance, but retreated instead. Fishball saw with his own eyes that some of the enemies had retreated nearly 100 meters from their original positions. Now, the entire front line was like a zigzag wave. This also revealed that the enemy was not a complete unit, but a temporary patchwork of several teams. In addition, Fishball also noticed that the enemy might not be that good at using flintlocks. Although they were obviously imitating the First Army, they did not make full use of the weapons in their hands. Otherwise, they would not have lasted until now. Although it sounded inconceivable, the team had yet to lose a single person in battle, and only 5 were injured. This could not be explained by pure luck. Can someone give me some bullets? I'm almost out of ammo. Me too. I only have 1 clip left. What should we do next, Monitor? Hansen ran back and asked, there are no more enemies around the machine guns. Should we retreat after nightfall? Fishball looked up at the sky. It was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun set faster in late autumn, and it would be dark in an hour and a half. At that time, the threat of the enemy's firearms would be greatly reduced. Even if they had their backs to direct fire, they would still have a chance. But perhaps it was because he had been running away for too long, so he always thought more about retreating. It was true that the darkness of the night had weakened the accuracy of the muskets, but the First Army would also lose their greatest reliance. More importantly, if the enemy regained their morale because of this move and chased after them, would they be able to repel them again? Of course, if they had enough ammo, the squad might be able to retreat before the attackers could react. However, based on the current situation, the nobles would soon notice that the firing rate in the camp was no longer what it used to be, and it would not be difficult to guess their next move. What's more, 2 of the 5 injured were heavily injured. Retreating with injured teammates would definitely slow them down. Fishball would never abandon his teammates. He hesitated for a while and finally made up his mind. Call the others over. I have something to say. Not long after, Hansen gathered his teammates who were scattered on the front line. The enemy did not seem to notice that the First Army's shooting points had become more concentrated. They were still crouching on the grass and occasionally fired a shot. This further strengthened Fishball's conviction. He briefly explained the situation and then looked around. His Majesty always said that attack is always the best defense. If we can defeat these nobles in one fell swoop, we won't have to worry about whether we stay or leave. But if we do the opposite, the enemy may have a chance to bite us back. Now it's time to make a decision. We can leave our fate to the enemy, or we can control it ourselves. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Monitor, do you mean we should take the initiative to attack? Hansen was stunned. They outnumber us. I've thought about it. They seem to have the advantage in numbers, but most of them have lost the will to fight. It's just that long-range shooting won't make them realize that they're going to lose. If we can defeat their strongest team, maybe we can completely destroy their will to fight. But we're running out of bullets. The First Army is not an army that only relies on guns to fight. The combat manual emphasized this point, Fishball said in a low voice. After a moment of silence, Hansen was the first to speak. I'll listen to you. That's right, Monitor. I don't want to leave anyone behind. Either we all go or we all stay. Give the order, Monitor. Everyone shouted. Fishball nodded solemnly. He would never have thought that he would make such a decision in the past. He had only been in the army for 4 years, but he felt that something had changed in him. You're not a coward. A sweet and melodious voice rang in his ears. He took a deep breath and said word by word, everyone, put on the bayonet. The structure of the gun had changed from the oldest flintlock rifle to the bolt rifle, but the bayonet had never been removed. The only difference was that it was more useful than before. The soldiers drew their swords from their sheaths and inserted them into the jaws. Fishball inserted the last clip into the barrel, raised his arm and shouted, "Follow me." He took the lead and jumped out of the camp. The other teammates followed him and rushed toward the enemy closest to the front line. The enemies obviously did not realize what had happened. Many of them did not even get up from the ground but continued to shoot at the First Army in a clumsy posture. Fishball was prepared to be shot, but the pain he expected never came. The distance of more than 100 meters was covered in the blink of an eye. Only then did the enemy stand up as if he had just woken up from a dream. He stood there with his rifle in his hand, not knowing what to do. He stabbed the bayonet into the chest of the first enemy according to the posture he had practiced in training. Kill! His teammates also rushed forward and rushed into the crowd while they were descending the mountain. Shouts and screams rang out across the hillside. Fishball stabbed one down and shot another dead. When he turned around and stabbed the third, he found that there were no new targets around him. He looked around and found that the enemies had already begun to flee. They probably did not expect that the First Army would rush out of the camp and engage in close combat with them. The last string in their hearts was broken. When enemies met on a narrow path, the braver ones would win. The allied forces of the nobles, who had been clenching their teeth for a long time, did not put up much resistance before they all collapsed. When the troops at the front fled, panic spread through the entire army like a plague. The teams that were already retreating threw down the weapons in their hands and fled down the mountain in a panic. Many of them even lost their footing and rolled down the mountain, knocking down a bunch of their companions who were running in front of them. When the heavy machine guns fell into the hands of the First Army and turned their muzzles to shoot at the crowd running down the mountain, the enemies hated themselves even more for not having 2 legs. If it were not for the fact that the machine guns did not have many bullets to begin with, they might not have been able to escape. Fishball did not know how far he had chased them until his legs became weak and he slowly stopped. The surviving enemies on the hillside all knelt on the ground and raised their hands to surrender. The nobles who had been lingering in the back ran faster than anyone else and were almost invisible now. He clenched his fists and felt an indescribable joy in his heart. However, before he could savor the joy, his teammates rushed up and pushed him to the ground. "Monitor, we won. Long live His Majesty. Long live the First Army." Everyone lifted him up and threw him high into the air. That's right, they won. Everyone had survived. There was no better ending than this. Fishball opened his arms to the setting sun and joined the cheers of victory with everyone else. Chapter 1287. Sedimentation Bay, Kingdom of Wolfheart. Iron Axe soon heard of the victory of this counter-ambush. He immediately sent a messenger to express his appreciation and encouragement to the Fishball squad, asking them to temporarily return to safety and wait for the arrival of the reinforcements. Although the Fishball squad had defeated the allied forces of the old nobles, their unflinching performance and their willpower were excellent examples of propaganda. Compared to continuing to rescue the refugees, it was obviously more meaningful for them to publicize their deeds, especially when the First Army was withdrawing. Not long ago, he received two pieces of bad news. First, the soldiers lurking in the red mist reported that the nobles had taken over the demon's job. According to the report, the knight from many families of the Kingdom of Everwinter was intercepting the refugees. As the same kind, their coercion and temptation were undoubtedly much more effective than that of the foreign races. The First Army would take a great risk in entering the Red Mist area. Most of the time, they could only rescue the refugees from the periphery. As a result, the number of people at the evacuation points had decreased to varying degrees. Second, the demons had once again intensified their attacks on the First Army. This was a complete battle report. First, a sentry post had observed a large number of devil beasts flying out of the Red Mist area from the southeast and heading towards Archduke Island. Then, the island's garrison had made preparations for defense and had cut off sea transportation. But unexpectedly, the group of devil beasts suddenly disappeared in the airspace between two observation posts. When they reappeared, they were already on top of an evacuation team. The team had also received the news that the devil beasts were heading east and was working overtime to evacuate the people. As a result, they were exposed to the demons without any cover. Although the team put up a great resistance, they were still completely annihilated. There was still no complete statistical report, but according to the reinforcement team, nearly 2,000 refugees were killed in the attack and the army had lost at least 100 people. Such a heavy loss forced Iron Axe to make a decision to withdraw the battle line. The two pieces of bad news could be said to be a chain reaction. The general staff had considered the possibility of the nobles' betrayal, but they did not expect it to happen so quickly. The big families of the Kingdom of Everwinter had been fighting for nearly 2 years without a new king. Now, they were united under the will of the demons, which was quite ironic. The current situation was very obvious. The Great Migration phase was coming to an end, and the First Army needed to accumulate strength to defend the border area covered by the Red Mist. Currently, about 5,000 soldiers had arrived at the Cage Mountain and the Sedimentation Bay, which was less than 1/6 of the total number of soldiers. Since he did not know how many soldiers the demons could mobilize, he could not afford to lose any more soldiers before he figured out the enemy's situation. What worried Iron Axe the most was that when the First Army had limited transportation and insufficient troops, the demons would concentrate their army to attack the nodes that had yet to be defended. In that case, the First Army would be caught in a dilemma where it would be impossible to defend or rescue them. After all, in the Kingdom of Wolfheart, there were no mobile fortresses, like armored trains that they could rely on. "Sir." At this time, a guard walked into the mansion's study. "The ship of Lady Edith Kant, the Minister of the General Staff, has just arrived at the port." "Oh." Iron Axe raised his eyebrows. He was just thinking of someone to share his worries with, and now the person to share his worries had come by herself. "Coincidentally, I'm free. I'll go to the port to pick her up." At the port, Iron Axe saw the Pearl of the Northern region surrounded by the members of the General Staff. All of them looked liberated and seemed to have completely forgotten the horrible experience she had when they were tortured by her. It had only been about a year since she became the minister, but she had already won the respect and approval of the staff. Iron Axe thought of the nobles in the kingdom of Everwinter and the kingdom of Wolfheart, and then looked at the former daughter of a duke. He could not help but sigh inwardly. Commander-in-Chief. Edith also saw Iron Axe. She put her hand on her chest and saluted. Long time no see. I hope my subordinates didn't cause you any trouble. They've all fulfilled their responsibilities in the line of duty. Iron Axe returned a military salute. They were basically equal in status, so there was no misunderstanding between them. In other words, apart from His Majesty and Lady Silvermoon, Edith was the only person he was willing to talk to. In other words, they didn't give you any surprises? Edith shrugged and turned to look at the staff. It seems that you haven't performed well recently. Iron Axe could not help but smile. This pearl of the northern region was still as unforgiving as before. It's not a bad thing if we can win the war steadily. Edith did not pursue the matter further. Instead, she changed the topic. By the way, this time I came with a new weapon developed by His Majesty according to the frontline intelligence. Are you interested in taking a look? Iron Axe's eyes immediately lit up. Of course. Please lead the way. They came to the heavily guarded loading area, which had been isolated by the garrison. Huge wooden boxes were being lowered from the ships and neatly placed in a corner of the yard. Many of the boxes had been opened, revealing the weapons wrapped in oiled paper. Iron Axe's attention was quickly drawn to a small cannon. Good choice, Edith said with a smile. This 75mm cannon is the most expensive firearm in this shipment. His Majesty hopes to use it to fill the firepower gap between the mortars and the Longsong cannons. It doesn't need a witch to transport it. It can be assembled on 4 wheels and can be pulled by a horse or 2 people. The cannonballs can also be carried by people. This reminds me of the original front-mounted field artillery. Iron Axe nodded. He immediately understood the use of this portable weapon. Compared with the short-range anti-demon grenades and mortars, the new cannon was obviously more suitable to deal with the thick-skinned spider demons. Even if they did not have time to set up artillery positions, the frontline soldiers would not be helpless against the spider demons. As for the new rifle over there, it's a semi-automatic weapon, Edith introduced as they walked. Edith explained as they walked. The results of the test were pretty good. 2 or 3 guns can achieve the same effect as a heavy machine gun. You must be familiar with the person who came up with this idea. He's the commander of the artillery battalion. Although the official product has been improved by His Majesty, it's still called the rifle. But it's only a temporary substitute. I heard that the real automatic weapon is currently in the trial production stage. When the finished product comes out, it'll be shipped here immediately. The one on the far side is the new anti-demon grenade. Its caliber is much larger than the previous one. I think the Ministry of Chemical Industry has improved the propellant. The visitors gradually dispersed. When they walked all the way to the edge of the yard, only Iron Axe and Iron Axe were left. What's wrong? Is the war not going well? Edith suddenly asked. Iron Axe was startled. Only then did he realize that it was not a coincidence that Edith had brought him here alone. You saw it? If not, you wouldn't have come to the dock to welcome me. I can't hide it from you. Iron Axe exhaled and told Edith about the recent bad news and what he was worried about. Before the transportation channel is opened, it'll take us several months to gather all the troops and ammunition here. However, the demons may launch an attack from somewhere at any time. Even if Miss Sylvie, Lightning, and Maggie are here, they won't be able to monitor such a wide front. The war is imminent, but I know so little about the enemy. This is not a good sign. I see. Edith pondered for a moment. As for the transportation channel, I can't do anything about it. But in terms of intelligence, it may not be so difficult. You have an idea? Sort of. You only think about using the First Army to solve the problem. That's why it's so tricky. The Pearl of the Northern Region said slowly. The demons seem to be killing many birds with one stone by driving the nobles to serve them, but it also creates an opportunity for us. As long as the demons don't wipe out every city, we can plant a large number of eyes in the belly of the enemy. Iron Axe seemed to realize something. These eyes aren't soldiers of the First Army. Chapter 1288. When Roland received the report, which was jointly signed by the First Army and the General Staff, he immediately thought of the classic plots of spy movies. Obviously, this was a highly feasible plan. He even considered more than Edith. Although the profession of spy had existed since ancient times and had different names in different eras, the concept and image that he was familiar with were gradually formed during World War I and World War II. Before that, most of the intelligence transmission was simple two-way communication, and there was no strict system. As the government became more and more controlled over the people, it became more and more difficult for spies to survive, so it became complicated and systematic. This also meant that the loose control system, which was ruled by the feudal lords, could not eradicate the existence of spies. As long as the spies were trained in the most basic professional knowledge and cut off the connections between the upper and lower levels, they would not be able to find the spies even if they turned the entire city upside down to look for them. After all, for the lower lines who provided intelligence, the upper line was simply a shadowy figure that they had never seen before. If it were Nightingale, she would not be able to get any information from the lower lines. Roland immediately approved the plan. However, he did not intend to completely leave this matter to Edith. This had nothing to do with trust. Espionage required a lot of planning and arrangement. He valued the Pearl of the Northern Region's strategy and the overall situation, which was rare in this era. If he spent his energy on this matter, it would be putting the cart before the horse. Professional matters could be left to professionals to handle. He spread out a new piece of paper and wrote the name Hill Fox at the head of the letter. The political situation in the Kingdom of Dawn had basically stabilized, so this circus leader should be a little bored. After asking Nightingale to pass the letter to Honey, Roland began to consider another matter. That was the intelligence network. In the beginning, the information that he had to deal with, be it war or political affairs, was basically limited to the territory of Greycastle. Since the beginning of the Tequila expedition, there had been a significant delay in flying messengers. Fortunately, at that time, the Seagull glider could go back and forth to the front in one day, so it was acceptable to use it as a supplement. But now that the main battlefield was between the Kingdom of Wolfheart and the Kingdom of Everwinter, the inconvenience of communication was particularly prominent. For example, the report in his hand was sent to him by sea, but it was signed a week ago. Replying by animal messenger would be quicker, but it would still take 2 or 3 days. More importantly, Honey did not control many messengers that could perform long-distance flights of more than 1,000 kilometers. After all, she could only make the animals obey her orders, but she could not change their inherent habits. Besides, there was a limit to the number of short-distance messengers. Honey's magic power was not enough to support the communication needs of the entire western region, let alone the whole country and beyond. When those spies started to operate, how to send the information back quickly and safely was also a big problem that needed to be solved urgently. Roland knew in his heart that the ultimate solution was to send a wireless message. Although the principle of a wired telegraph was simpler, it was limited by the attenuation of the line. It was no different from the telephone that was currently used. Even if the distance was doubled, it would only be 100 kilometers. If it was any further, it would require the addition of a repeater, such as an electron tube that could amplify the signal. The problem was that if he could make an electron tube, the wireless signal would not be out of reach. In this era, there was no concept of electromagnetic pollution. The modulated electromagnetic wave was just like a baby's cry in the silent night. As long as an antenna was set up on the impassable mountain range, it would not be difficult for it to transmit over 1,000 kilometers. If he could successfully make a wireless telegraph, it would only take a few minutes for the frontline report to be sent to his desk. If he could go one step further and equip the entire army with portable wireless telegraphs, its strategic significance would be no less than that of the Dawn Project. Of course, although he was clear about it, he had no idea how to do it. Maybe it's time to find a few more projects for the design bureau of Greycastle, Roland thought. After entering the dream world at night, he first sent Zero off to school and then drove to the Three Leaves construction site in the southern suburbs of the city. Roland had to admit that Guard was indeed a straightforward businessman. As long as he had promised something, he would execute it immediately. Guard not only handed over the management of the factory to Roland, but also gave him a set of maintenance services, including painting the rusty walls and pillars, replacing the office equipment, and so on. Guard did not seem to be perfunctory at all. If it were not for the fact that the Clover Group was unwilling to give up the land of the tube-shaped apartment, Roland would have liked to have more dealings with such people. He parked the car and found that the open space outside the factory was a little strange. Usually, few people visited this place, but today, there were many construction workers. At the same time, he heard a series of dull roars, as well as the unique sound of reciprocating mechanical collisions. Roland quickly walked through the crowd and saw a strange-looking caterpillar machine. It was obvious that this machine was still a semi-finished product, and only part of it had been completed. If one only looked at the caterpillar and the load wheels, there was nothing special about it. The reason why it attracted the attention of the construction workers was that there was a steam piston system above it and another tractor that provided steam for it. Seeing this, Roland could not help laughing out loud. It turned out that this was the method that Master Sia had come up with. In order to minimize the impact of the imaginary boiler and water tank, he had installed all the equipment on another tractor. During the test, the two tractors had to run side by side for the steam engine to run. In the eyes of outsiders, this was equivalent to a tractor that not only had to ensure that it could run on its own, but it also had to provide power for another test product. It was almost the same as a solar flashlight that would only work when there was light, but never when there was no light. Ahem. Boss, you're here, Master Sia greeted Roland awkwardly, seeming to feel that it was stupid to do this. However, Roland did not mind it at all. Well done. This is exactly what I want. He came to the factory almost every other week to check on the progress. The last time he came, the tractor was just an empty frame, but this time, it could already run on its own. Roland could tell that Master Sia had really put a lot of effort into this project. Is that so? Master Sia touched his bald head. Are you sure that your collector friends will be interested in this thing? The main parts of the test product were all processed by the factory lathe, right? Yes, I can guarantee that. Master Sia quickly rubbed his hands and said, but the other tractor, boiler, water tank, and other equipment were all bought second-hand. It cost me about 300,000 yuan so far. Chapter 1289. Master Sia immediately beamed with joy, but the woman beside her sighed softly. Roland naturally noticed this as well. Ever since the dream world absorbed the core cyclones many times, his power had been constantly increasing, and his perception and acuity had risen to a new level. Although the woman was very discreet, Roland could still see her out of the corner of his eye. This woman was Qing, the secretary and treasurer sent by Guard. It was said that she had just graduated from a famous school. Her talent and ability were above average, and she was quite pretty. She was the kind of person who had won at the starting line. She was the only one in the entire factory who knew that the Clover Group was responsible for all the expenses, and the current boss was basically not a dime. In Qing's eyes, Roland was probably trying to take advantage of the Clover Group and take advantage of the employer. It was understandable that she looked angry. However, Roland did not care. As long as he dragged Qing down with him, all her complaints would vanish. Of course, it's all thanks to everyone's hard work. He smiled at the secretary and said, if it's successful, I'll give all the employees in the factory a month's salary. That's right. Boss, you're so thoughtful. Master Sia nodded. No. That's not what I meant. Qing did not expect that Roland would notice her little trick. She said awkwardly, I was just wondering when the company would be profitable. If everything went well, that day would never come. Roland waved his hand calmly and said, don't worry. My friends are all people who pursue their dreams. Making money is not a problem for them. Just wait for the promotion and salary increase. Well said, well said. Master Xie seemed to have fallen into a fantasy of reaching the peak of his life. He smiled so widely that the wrinkles on his face gathered. By the way, Roland looked at Qing Qing and said, I have a new project to develop. Come to the office with me. Ah. Boss, Master Xie said as Roland turned to leave, do you have any other requirements for this tractor? For example, the shape, the color, and so on. Do you really think it's a prop in a movie? Roland shook his head and laughed. As long as it's reliable, everything else is not important. But please go ahead. If possible, I hope that the final product can have 5 pairs of wheels. That's not a problem at all, Master Xie said as he patted his chest. When I designed the chassis, I considered expandability. Leave it to me. Since the employees of the factory ran out to watch the test car, the factory was quite quiet. Roland noticed that Qingqing had increased the distance between them from 2 meters to 5 meters after they crossed the workshop gate. Roland could not help but feel amused. It seemed that Guard did not reveal her identity to Roland. Otherwise, she should have known that when a martialist wanted to do something bad, she could even run 50 meters first, let alone 5 meters. However, he was too lazy to improve his image in the eyes of his employees. As long as they worked hard for him, nothing else mattered. After walking into the messy office, Roland sat on the boss seat and went straight to the point. It's like this, I have a friend, there it was again. Qingqing could not help but curse in her heart. Every project started with a friend. The problem was that there were not many friends who were willing to spend hundreds of thousands of yuan on a pile of garbage. She admitted that rich people had all kinds of strange hobbies. However, judging from the boss's appearance, he did not look like a son of a rich family. She was confident in her judgment. After all, she had studied in a prestigious school and seen many rich second generations, but she had never seen a person as simple and unadorned as the boss. Even if the former kept a low profile, they would not treat themselves badly in terms of food and clothing. Although the things they used were niche, the quality and price were definitely not cheap. Moreover, there were fewer and fewer young people who were willing to lay low. But Mr. Roland, the clothes he wore were the most common street stalls, and he did not have a single ornament on him. Even the car he drove was a bumpy van. It was not enough to describe him as low-key. He exuded the aura of poverty from head to toe. How rich could the friend of such a person be? After graduation, she successfully applied for a job in the Clover Group, the largest enterprise in the city. She wanted to add a beautiful record to her resume, but she did not expect that the big boss would directly transfer her to this small factory, where she had to work on all kinds of strange projects. She began to wonder if Mr. Guard had been cheated, or if he was deliberately using this factory to cover up some shady business. For example, the new project proposed by the boss was wireless communication. Qingqing almost wanted to put her hand on her forehead and sigh. A walkie-talkie cost dozens of yuan on the internet, and an antique transmitter could also be bought, but he wanted to start with the most basic electronic tube. Just like the tractor project, it had to be handmade from scratch. Not a single ready-made part could be bought. That was a waste of money on purpose. I don't need to recruit people who are too professional. They can be graduates or radio amateurs. I can build a prefab house outside the factory as an office. It will save me the trouble of running back and forth. Roland explained his requirements in detail. I'll give them all the equipment they want, but remember, all the parts must be produced here. It doesn't matter if it's rough or crude. In other words, the lower the technology, the better. Doomsday Wasteland style, understand? That's my friend's style. This is different from a salary increase. I'm afraid I have to report it to Mr. Guard first. It's okay, Roland said generously. I think he'll agree. Just then, his cell phone rang in his pocket. It was a call from the Martialist Association. Roland asked Qingqing to leave before picking up the phone. Hello, Mr. Roland. He heard a calm and familiar voice. It was Rock, the defender of the association. I have a new task for you. Do you have time to come to Greenleaf Sanatorium this afternoon? Now that Rock was the design bureau of Greycastle's biggest backer, Roland had no reason to refuse, so he agreed without hesitation. Since the destruction of the magic creature from the other side of the erosion, the whereabouts of the other fallen evils had suddenly become much more secretive, as if they had sensed danger and completely retreated from this city. As a result, the search results of the Tequila Witches were much lower than before. However, Roland had a feeling that it was not that simple. The goal of the fallen evils was to seize the awakened force of nature and weaken the power of the dream world. Now that the Prism City had been attacked and the martial arts contest had begun, a large number of martialists had gathered here. They should not give up so easily. Chapter 1290. How's your recovery? Fei Yuhan walked into Ward 402 with a stack of books and placed them on the bedside table. Thank you. Valkyries nodded gratefully. I can get out of bed and walk around. The doctor said that I'll be back to normal in about a week. That's good. Even among martialists, your self-healing ability is top-notch. Fei Yuhan smiled. Is that so? The force of nature has a different effect on the body. Not every awakened can be like you, who can fully recover in a month after the bones in your legs were crushed. However, you might not have seen a martialist suffer such a serious injury, so you don't know your own potential. Fei Yuhan paused. You should be one of the strongest in your world, right? Why do you think so? My master always said that the strong are usually strong in every aspect. Fast healing means that you have an excellent bone quality, and your body has a strong ability to resist attacks. These kinds of people are usually 1 in a million when it comes to martial arts, just like me. Fei Yuhan said calmly, when your injuries are fully healed, perhaps we can spar a few more times. Is that why you recruited me into your team? Valkyrie said helplessly. You're a super genius of the association. I don't think I can help you with martial arts. It doesn't matter. Besides, you've been lying in bed for so long. You can only recover your strength quickly by sparring with powerful people. After all, the fallen evils won't care about your injuries. Valkyries nodded after a moment of silence. Then I'll be in your care. No problem. Fei Yuhan smiled. By the way, I went to the city center yesterday and bought some special pastries from the Kargard Peninsula. They're in the bag at the top of the book. You should be interested. After all, the 3 meals provided by the hospital are a little too monotonous. At this point, Fei Yuhan noticed a slight movement in Fei Yuhan's throat. It was an inconspicuous swallowing motion. Although the Kargard tribe could eat ordinary food, it was said that it was difficult to distinguish between good and bad. Only the unique ingredients produced in their land of origin could satisfy their taste buds. Fei Yuhan had tried this unique delicacy before, but she found it completely unacceptable. Of course, there was also a small group of people who claimed that as long as they carefully tasted it, they would be able to experience the rare deliciousness of this world. However, this view was not recognized by the public. Therefore, food from Kargard was only sold in some specialized stores. Compared to the majority of the residents in the city, the people from the peninsula were very few. Thank you. Valkyries hit her subconscious reaction well and thanked him again. It's nothing. I'm the captain, after all. It's my duty to care for my teammates. Fei Yuhan waved her hand. But then again, you really like reading. Yeah, when I'm bored, I just want to find some books to flip through. It's become a habit. It's a good habit. There isn't much entertainment in the sanatorium, but there are a lot of books. If there's anything else you want to read, just tell me. Thank you. At this point, the two did not continue the conversation. For a moment, only the rustling of pages could be heard in the room. Fei Yuhan stood by the window of the ward and looked at the scenery outside. The weather today was very good. It could be considered a refreshing autumn day. The willow branches beside the artificial lake drooped into the water, creating ripples in the gentle breeze. Further away, a flock of swans leisurely swam across the surface of the lake, leaving a string of white waves in the reflection of the blue sky. This was indeed a good place to rest and recuperate. However, the corner of her eyes never left Valkyrie's. Through the reflection of the glass window, Fei Yuhan had been observing her every move. She was not a warm-hearted person, and she had no interest in forcing others to compete with her. The reason why she pretended to be like this was because she had accidentally sensed during the visiting meeting a month ago that this person might know Roland. No, to be more accurate, she knew Roland, but Roland treated her as someone else. Those seemingly casual flirting were in fact to confirm her own judgment. Fei Yuhan believed that she was right. But what puzzled her was that Roland did not show any hostility when he asked. His tone was rather relaxed, which meant that regardless of whether Valkyries was the person he was familiar with or not, she did not pose a threat. But the latter showed strong hostility and nervousness. Even though it only happened the moment they entered the door, Fei Yuhan, who was walking in front, still caught it. What kind of relationship would produce such a difference in reaction? If it was a little more melodramatic, it would not be difficult to imagine a couple falling out because of love, and the former would go through 10 years of plastic surgery to take revenge, and the former would be filled with regret, but Fei Yuhan did not think in that direction. The reason was that Valkyrie's subsequent control over her expression was too shocking. If not for the initial scene, even she would not have been able to discover any clues. If it was just a matter of love, it was really hard to believe that someone could do this. Fei Yuhan had been very observant since she was young, and after her force of nature awakened, it reached a whole new level. Because of this, those who were truly familiar with her distanced themselves from her, and were even afraid to interact with her. For a long time, she had gotten used to this feeling of alienation, and gradually distanced herself from everyone. After all, she only needed to look at them from afar to be able to guess their thoughts. But Roland was different. This newly promoted hunter from the association was one of the few people she could not see through. It was the same for Valkyries, who had a certain relationship with Roland. They were obviously hiding something, and the secret behind it was hard for her not to pay attention to it. After interacting with Valkyries for a while, Fei Yuhan was able to confirm her intuition. This martialist from the Kargard Peninsula behaved like an ordinary person, but there were still many details in his life that revealed abnormalities. If she had known him before Roland, she would not have suspected anything. But after thinking about it, these abnormalities could surprisingly be linked together. For example, she had previously brought a snack from her hometown to Valkyries. The latter did not show any joy at the beginning, but later discovered that Valkyries had eaten it cleanly. But this time, there was a clear change in Valkyries' reaction. At first glance, this did not seem to be a big problem, but upon careful thought, it meant that Valkyries did not eat to fill his stomach, but that he did not even know the taste of his hometown snacks. It did not make sense for a person from the Kargard Peninsula to not have tasted Kargard's specialty dishes. In addition, in the past month, Fei Yuhan had never seen Valkyries play with his mobile phone. Nowadays, young people could not leave their mobile phone for even a moment, but Valkyries seemed to be disconnected from it. It was really strange. And those books, according to Valkyries' request, Fei Yuhan had borrowed history books from the library. Although it was a good habit to love reading, Fei Yuhan had to admit that she did not have the patience and willpower to read a boring and tasteless history book for an entire day. If the change in his attitude towards food was due to his initial lack of appetite, the fact that he did not play with his mobile phone due to his gentle nature, and the fact that he only read history because of his special hobby, it seemed to make sense. But for all these abnormalities to appear at the same time was too much of a coincidence. Compared to the above reasons, Fei Yuhan had a feeling that Valkyries was quickly familiarizing himself with the world. If it were any other time, she would probably just laugh it off, but after thinking of the words, "Your Majesty," an unbelievable guess suddenly emerged in her mind. She did not want to continue thinking about it because it was too horrifying, and even made her shudder. But once the thought emerged, she could no longer ignore it. With it, all the abnormalities had a reasonable explanation. In this city, some unusual people had snuck into it.